Penn School District Board of School Directors, April 3rd, 1997. Our meeting tonight is the first in a series of scheduled to review the preliminary budget for 1997-98 fiscal year. This meeting is being videotaped for community cable channels. Individuals attending this meeting and intending to speak to the board should be aware that they are being videotaped. In order to meet the requirements of Pennsylvania Sunshine Law, it is necessary to record the names of all citizens who speak to the board during the meeting. To assure compliance with this requirement, it is essential that those planning to address the board come to the microphone and state their name and address. Members of the audience are asked to limit their questions and comments to no more than 5 minutes. This limit will permit time for all those who wish to speak to the board to do so. Whenever members of the audience exceed this time limit, the board president may ask the individual to yield the microphone to the next speaker. And this is reference to board policy 8344.2. Sorry there, I had my contact just blurred over. Gosh, what a feeling. It's only 7:30. Before we begin, I do want to make a note, a president's note that as we proceed through the budget hearings, this being the first of probably many meetings between now and June 30th, we will close between 10 and 10:30. I will find an appropriate stopping point and end the meeting. I think meetings that go to 11, 12, 1 in the morning are counterproductive. They are unfair to people that go to work the next morning, some as early as 4 in the morning, to be at work by 5, of which I am one of those people. So it is important that we make good use of the time here. 7:30 to 10:30 is a 3-hour meeting. That's plenty. I'd like to think that you're all family members. You want to get back to your family, and to say the least, you want board members that are fresh. You really don't want to have to listen to any of us that late at night. So if we have to have more meetings, we will do so, and I was encouraged to do it this way by quite a number of the board members. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Mr. Kelly, if he would, to lead us in a Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. You'll notice that we have a new face sitting here to my right, who is about to become an old face, because he's going to age between now and June 30th. This is Dr. Hassler's first budget in the North Penn School District. Is your seatbelt on? Bulletproof vest on? You sure? Okay. Anyway, this is his first, and I ask that everybody be kind to Dr. Hassler, at least for the first meeting. Okay. And then it's every man for himself. Okay? Okay, if you would.
I hope I don't age between now and 10:30. Good evening. Tonight we will begin to examine a budget document for the next fiscal year. This document is a preliminary budget. In other words, it is a working draft which should be finalized during the next 6 weeks, resulting in the adoption of a preliminary budget on May 15th. Many of the documents included in the information packet for this meeting have not been distributed previously. They will serve as backup information and will be explained in detail tonight. Board members and administrators will be working together to review and analyze these materials. Work on this budget will take place during several special budget meetings and many meetings where district administrators will continue to focus on topics and budget line items which need to be trimmed or revised. For me, this is an interesting and somewhat different experience. I arrived to begin my work at North Penn after the budget development process had already begun. Building principals, department heads, supervisors, and cabinet members have already completed much of the preliminary work prior to my involvement in the process. So, for me, this has been an interesting challenge to try to catch up, become informed, and begin to assume responsibility in those areas which are clearly within the expectations of my assignment. This is a budget developed by many people. Without any exaggeration, I'm sure that nearly 100 different individuals played a critical role in the compilation of the information displayed in the document that you have. Beyond that number of people, we were working with probably several thousand individual requests, which began with classroom teachers, nurses, librarians, counselors, secretaries, custodians, and transportation department staff members. This budget represents equipment needs, supply needs, and all the support for a school district staff of approximately 1,600 employees. But most importantly, this budget funds a comprehensive educational program for nearly 13,000 students. This budget also funds transportation services for non-public school students to over 60 private schools outside the boundaries of the North Penn School District. State-mandated services to district non-public schools are also included in the areas of health services, psychological services, and many other areas. This preliminary budget would require a tax increase of 5.9 mils if it were adopted as is tonight. However, we know our work during the next 6 weeks will require us to make many changes. Some of these changes will save money, while others will require additional expenditures. Changes in anticipated revenue may also influence the final budget. Our plan for tonight includes an examination of the revenue portion of the budget, followed by a review of staffing needs for the regular education and special education sections. We may have a tendency for our discussion to stray to some of the budget areas reserved for following meetings, so we need to decide as we work together to try to stay on our agenda for this evening. I'd like to thank the administrators sitting at the table tonight and also all the administrators in the district for helping to develop the budget and also in the presentation tonight. I'd also like to add that the administration has attempted to anticipate and organize the information which we feel you need clarification on. Obviously, with all the category areas, there may be additional information or more detail which we will need to gather and bring back at subsequent meetings. Finally, this budget has several major influences, several areas of unique development which are important to our planning for the next fiscal year. I will list them briefly, and we will elaborate as we move forward and work on this tonight. First of all, major influences that will require significant new expenditures are as follows as of tonight. First, additional teachers to provide for enrollment growth. Currently, we have 13.5 elementary teachers, 8 secondary teachers, 5 special education teachers, and 1 additional high school counselor, new staffing, at a projected additional cost of $971,500. In addition, the cost for medical insurance for staff has increased 12%. There's a new textbook adoption for language arts and English in the budget, which will require an expenditure of $472,000 in this coming year. In addition, there are salary increases of 2% for most service staff positions. And finally, salary increases for members of the bargaining unit according to the existing contract, which approximate a cost of $2 million. There are also major influences which will represent significant savings as follows. First of all, a reduction in the retirement rate, which we must pay to the Pennsylvania State Employment Retirement Service, which would be an approximate savings of $1 million. Savings from the Early Retirement Incentive Program, the ERIP, an estimated savings at this point for at least 12 retiring teachers of $215,000. Additional savings are anticipated as the board acts on several pending requests. Thirdly, savings in debt service, approximately $1.3 million due to the anticipated sale of the Keenest Road property. And finally, savings in the current contract with the NPEA bargaining unit could be significant pending ratification of the pending contract. At this point, Dennis Kelly will explain each of these savings during his presentation. During his remarks, Mr. Kelly will also explain the impact of the assessment appeals. It should be noted that this budget does not provide at this time funding for any major commitment for improved technology, either in the schools or in the management areas. It is assumed, however, that a commitment to fund technology will be forthcoming through the Technology Committee. Now it is time to turn our attention to the revenue section of the budget, and I will have Dennis Kelly direct our attention to significant items.
Mr. Kelly, if you could wait one moment. There was a meeting prior to Dr. Bose going on vacation, and that meeting is a typical meeting that is held every 2 weeks between the board officers and the superintendent in order to set the agenda and to meet for general purposes. Mr. Hill and I met last Thursday with Dr. Bose, and at that time we discussed aspects of the budget. And though we're beginning a kickoff of this budget at 5.9 mils, it is the opinion of at least 5 board members that we're looking at a budget to hopefully end up between 0 and 2 mils. How that will happen, where that will happen is yet to be unfolded between now and June 30th. That is the wish of a majority of this board, and a very hard majority that of I know of at least 4 board members that are pushing hard for 0. So that is our effort. If it can be accomplished, it'll be a good thing. And if it can't, we're certainly going to be close. So, Mr. Kelly, if you would.
Mrs. Mango, I'd like to have your permission to say a few words before I begin.
Please do.
Thank you. As it's a night of first with Dr. Hassler having his first budget, for those who are not aware, this will be my last budget here at North Penn. On March 18th, I was appointed to the position of business manager of the school district of Haverford Township out in Delaware County. I asked Mrs. Mangle for permission to say a few words so that I could clearly illustrate why I'm doing what I'm doing. There's been enough controversies here, and I didn't want my departure to be misconstrued as another administrator leaving, because that's not the case. I've enjoyed my 6 years here. I've enjoyed working with this board. I know sometimes out there it may not look it, but we've all gotten along, and I consider myself friends with everyone here on this board. I'm leaving because Haverford Township is 8 miles from my home versus the 22 miles that I currently travel every morning. I also have elderly parents. I don't want to put the blame on them, but there's been a number of occasions where I've had to leave here due to people in their 80s having medical problems, and I feel it's in the best interest of my family and my parents that I be closer to home. So I wanted to make that perfectly clear, that I didn't want to see a headline that is not true. I know how things can get out of control, and I didn't want that to happen here, because I respect this board, and while I may not always have agreed with every decision that is made here, and I say this not to be a brownie or anything, but what I say that I respect you all because you all have children in this, the majority of you have children in the school district, and the decisions that this board makes affect their own children. And in the course of my friendship with them, I understand how much their children mean to them, and so I understand where they're coming from, that they would never do anything that would disrupt their children's education. So I'd like to end and just say thank you to the board. I'll be here till April 18th, and I start at Haverford on the 21st. But I've assured both Mrs. Mangle and Dr. Bose if there's any additional help needed on the budget, I'll be happy to come back. So thank you.
Dennis, thank you very much. And the formal acceptance of Dennis's resignation won't be until April 8th at the action meeting at that time. And I believe there are probably some well wishes that'll be said in return that evening at the time of that action. And Dennis, thank you for that explanation. I think it is a necessary one in light of the past, and really appreciate it. And I hope that we're all blessed with children that someday will consider their aging parents along with their career. And I'll tell you, that's something. To see a young person make that kind of a career decision along with meeting the needs of their parents. I'm impressed. Okay, now.
Yes, back to
the hard part.
The business in hand. I'd like everyone, if they have the budget document in front of them, to turn to page R1. We've broken it down into revenue sections are all prefixed with an R, and then we'll get into, when you get into basic expenditures, they start with just page 1. On page R1, you can see where we had a budget in 96-97 that started out with an estimated beginning balance of $2.3 million due to some large revenue items in the transfer tax, delinquent taxes, and interim taxes being received both in late June and July, that were collected in June. We ended up with a fund balance of $4.1 million. That led us to where we are with this budget, where we ended up with, we're estimating in 96-97 to have a fund balance of $4.8 million, which leads us into the 97-98 budget. We're projecting a spending increase budget to budget of 5.8%. I'd like to move on now to start with the revenue portion of the budget. If you turn your page to page R2. Both on R2 and R3, the R3 is the graphic for page R2. It shows where your local taxes are really what makes this district run. State revenue has, at one point, was 50% of the revenue coming in here, but that certainly has dropped, and as you can see, we're down to 17%. Federal revenue, that's minuscule here, and other financing sources are really just the money that we receive from other districts for educating their children, basically in our educational programs. If you turn, we can really get into it on local revenue. If you turn the page to page R4, this breaks down the local revenue into different topics shown on the left-hand side. What I'd like to do is skip down to R5, where it shows the summary of revenue from real estate taxes. What we have here in this district this year, last year we were at a 1.4 growth rate. At this point in the fiscal year, we're at 1.14. That's brought us up to the $300,354,177 in our assessments. What that represents over last year is two municipalities, Hatfield Borough and Lansdale Borough, have actually shown a decrease, mostly due to assessment appeals. There are three townships, Hatfield Township, Lyme, Lexington, and North Wales Borough, that are showing relatively no change at all. They've remained relatively flat. And then there are three, Upper Gwinnett, Montgomery, and Tollemenson, that show increases that range from 1% to 2.3%. Hopefully between now and June 30th, in an effort to meet Mrs. Mengel's request and this board's request to get our budget down, we will receive additional assessments, we're in April now, so at late April and late May, we should receive additional assessments that can help with our revenue picture. As we receive them, we'll report that to the board and show that additional revenue. The history of this district for collectible assessments, that's what you see in that last column where it says estimated collectible assessment. We have a history here of about 96% collection at first of the current fiscal year. We usually always make 100% when we add our delinquent taxes in, but we usually just show the 96% because that's been our history. I wanted to talk a little bit about the assessment appeals and how they've affected us. If you look on page, I think it's page 2 and 3 on your agenda, right after the agenda sheet. The first page says summary of assessment appeals from 92 to 95, and the second says from 95 to 97. What that shows is that during that time frame, for 96-97, it's showing the $1.9 million in successful assessment appeals, which translates into $544,000 in lost taxes. But I think the important thing for everyone to understand is the total. From 92-93 through 96-97, in total assessments, we lost $16.2 million for a total tax impact of $3,973,000. I think it's a tribute to this district that even through all this, we're still growing, even if at only 1.14%. Hopefully, as I said earlier, we'll get that up to the 1.4, at least, that we matched last year. But I think it's a tribute to the district that we are continuing to grow, and the people are continuing to move here. If we do, I wanted to tell the board, if we do reach that 1.4% increase, that will be an additional $219,000 in taxes if we make it to that 1.4.
Say again, Mr. Kelly.
If we make it, if we increase from the 1.14 where we currently are up to 1.4, which would match last year, that would we'd realize an additional $219,000 in taxes, which is about maybe 85% of a mill. I'd like to move on now back on page R4 with the other items. Interims, when you look at the second line item, interim real estate taxes, I've dropped that down because in talking to some of the municipalities, our housing starts are not going to reach what we did last year. So I'm being a little conservative on that because I won't want the district to get in trouble. So I'm reducing that where it was currently $1.3 million down to $1 million. The public utility realty tax, I'm leaving at the same amount as it was last year. That's always a dice throw. Depending on how good a season our utilities have, that money gets thrown into a pot in Harrisburg and divvied out based on the number of tax-exempt utility properties that are in any district. Ours have not decreased or increased. They've remained the same. But as you look back over the years, the dollars fluctuate. hopefully, I'm leaving it at the $1,000,009 that we received this year, that they'd have as good a year this year as they had in the past. The other major items are the interest on investments due to the new program we should have with our tax collectors, of which I will, and just to tell you, Mrs. Mangle, I will work with someone. I have that banking proposal, and I will work with someone to make sure that comes into effect on July 1st. I'm reflecting the additional interest income from the new tax collector situation there. Basically, everything else is relatively the same. Down in miscellaneous revenue, where you see the $400,000, that's where we show the revenue coming in from the Merck Science Grant. Moving on to page R7. If you turn the page to R7, I'd like to discuss our revenue from state sources. As always, our basic instructional subsidy is increasing, but unfortunately it's only increasing at a 2.9% rate. What that translates to, with our current enrollment of $12,888, is only $511 a student. So if you remember in the past, I've told you we were making about $515 a student. So even with the increase due to our enrollment growth, we're actually seeing a $4 per student decline in our ESB subsidy from the state. The next line, the tuition court-placed institutional, Mrs. Clark will be getting into that a little later when she talks about her 1305 and 1306 students in the special ed program. That's part of the subsidy, which it covers maybe not quite 50% of the expenses the district incurs. The other major item in there is the best news out of Harrisburg this year was the increase in the special ed subsidy. As you can see, it's increasing from $3.5 million up to $3.9 million, which is an 11% increase. It still doesn't come close to covering the cost of the program to the district, but any dollar is good in my opinion when you can get Harrisburg to increase a subsidy like that. The transportation subsidies.
Dennis, is that what's in the current budget they just passed?
Yes, son. Yes, Material. That's what's in there. They've upped the formula a little bit, and that's what's helped us. Because of our increasing enrollment, they base the formula on total enrollment, not just special ed enrollment.
I just saw the budget was passed, and I didn't know if that was effective.
Another good piece of news is in the transportation subsidy, which is shown going up from $1.3 million up to $1.5. Due to the fact of the cost of transporting non-public school students, the states recognize that, and they've increased subsidies to try to compensate the districts for that expense. You'll notice the only area going down is the revenue for retirement payments. As Dr. Hassler said in his opening remarks, they've decreased the retirement rate from 10.6 down to 8.76%, which the good news for a district like North Penn, it saves us close to $1 million in our retirement payments, since the state is still currently sharing in half of the retirement rates. That accounts for the decrease in that area. If you turn the page to R8, that shows what our revenue from federal sources is. That for us is a wash. That's not, later on you'll see expenditures that match that. What comes in for those Title I, Chapter 2, Voc Ed, Tech Prep, and drug-free school programs is also spent out. Our last item is on page R9, which is other financial sources. As I said earlier, that's the $70,000 we receive from other districts for the education of their students in our district. What I'd like to do now is move on. If you turn the page to what's currently page, it's just regular page 1, which is our expenditures.
Are we going to get back to the revenue question?
We will.
Would you? Okay.
We will.
If you would care to, would you want to stop now and do revenue first, Mr. Michael?
Yes, I will.
That's fine.
Are you comfortable with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Alrighty. Now, what we're going to do, this looks like a very long list, and it is, and then, when we get between 10 and 10:30, we're going to stop. But I want to go to each area, take board questions, public questions, and then we keep moving on. It's a long, slow process, but it's the only way that we're going to be able to come through $108 million.
Fine.
Okay. Board questions to the left, Mr. Moser.
Yes, Dennis, on page R4, the miscellaneous revenue, you said that was the Merck Science Grant?
Yes, sir. That's that. The major part of that is the Merck Science Grant.
Their contribution, that's their contribution?
Yes.
So it's $69,000 less this year than last year?
That's what the budget was. No, there are other items in there, Mr. Mosey. But the 400,000, the Merck grant is split between 400,000 for them and 351,771 for North.
So that's not changing this year?
That's not changing this year, and I was not given any other information yet for any miscellaneous revenue that will be coming in.
Okay, and going to page page R8, the goal's 2,000.
Yes.
We budgeted 100,000. We spent 83,000.
Well, what that is.
I don't understand. See, 83, 100, 167. I'm a little confused what you're doing there.
Well, what that was, Mr. Mosey, the entire grant was worth $250,000, but it was eligible to be spent over 3 years.
Okay.
We spent $83,000 the first year. I estimated we would spend $100,000 of that this year, and I threw the balance in as what would be revenue for next year.
Okay. Did we actually spend 100,000?
We're coming close to that. Yes, we are.
Okay. And the Education Economic Security Act of 1984. What is that?
That's a Title II. I always knew it as the Eisenhower Math Science Grant.
Right.
That's mainly for staff development for teachers in the math science area. Maybe someone else could help. If that's not it, I think that's a good explanation.
That's all I have, Mr. Domingo.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mosey. Mr. Allen.
On page 4, Dennis.
Yes.
I'm looking for income from food service. Where that is?
Mr. Allen, that's a whole separate account. That's North Penn is unique in, since we do not provide them with the subsidy, that's never been part of our general fund. According to state code, that food service can be in a separate fund, and that's ours has always been historically because of the fund balance that it has. It is part of our audit. If you remember, it's always part of our audit, but it's not, since the district is not providing a subsidy to it, it is not part of the general fund.
So I assume then that none of the expenses are in here.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's a self-contained fund. They're paying all their own. They're paying all their own benefits, all their own salaries, and keeping all their revenue.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Okay, Mr. Kelly, would you note then, in light of what Mr. Allen has just asked, which is a very good question, I think prior to June 30th, even though it isn't the type of reporting necessary for the general fund, I think that report, with the anticipation of next year, should be made available before we close out the budget hearings. That one night we...
The monthly report.
Okay.
Your June 30th, your June board meeting monthly report, and then
We'll
the
include
July
that.
report will reflect the year-to-date
Actuals.
for the fiscal year.
Very good. Thank you. Anything else, Mr. Allen?
No, thank you.
Mr. Hill?
I have no questions.
Mr. Clemens?
Dennis, page, let's see, for the public, for the audience, the page where we had Board of Assessment Appeals summary sheet,
Yes.
well, I don't know.
It was,
Okay, cover sheet's 1, next page 2, page 3. Where it says millage for 95, it's 92, 93, then it works all the way through 96, 97.
96, 97 needs to be corrected
That's
to
a typo,
278.5.
right, that
It's a
needs to
typo.
be changed to 278.5. Okay.
The dollars are figured out correctly. I picked that up myself, but unfortunately Dawn was gone.
That's all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clemens. Mr. Weitz?
No questions.
Mr. Sharp?
Just one point for clarification as we go forward with the budget. There were some opening comments made about our charge here with this budget. Dennis, when you reviewed the revenues at page R1,
Yes.
just for clarity as we move forward and recognize what we're dealing with, you talked about the $4.86 million.
Yes.
That's our beginning cash resources, and giving us total revenues, funding our revenues of this budget. I'd like it to be made clear that in reducing the fund balance to $1.5 million, basically we have $3.36 million funding this budget of a one-time revenue source. And I think that needs to be clear, that as we sit here and we're going to move into expenditures and we look at the level of the expenditures, that we recognize almost 50% of our increase in spending is through a one-time revenue source at this point in time. And that is something that we have to think about as we look forward to where we're left in the 98-99 year and deal also with the current year as our top priority. The rest of mine really deals with the expenditures, so when you get to the expenditures.
Okay, Dennis, current fund balance is exactly how much money?
We're estimating it'll be $4.8 million at the end of June 30th of 97.
And so is that a combination of monies that have been held over time? I know we're required so much money to be held according to the states. How much?
The state recommends between 4% and 5%, so that's right in the ballpark. It's high. The $4.8 million is high for North Penn when you look back historically what our fund balance has been, but it's well within the guidelines set by the state.
Okay. And generally, we've kept between 1.5 and 2.
That's correct.
Is my understanding. Does this represent monies that have been unspent?
Yes, it is.
In the budget?
It's a combination of both monies unspent and favorable returns that we've had in this year's revenue.
I know that Mrs. Scher's point's a good one. It's a one-time revenue source, but it's one that it took all year for this board to develop.
The good side is that we made those adjustments and we've made some changes since the budget was adopted.
Right.
That generated those funds. But on a long-term basis, the spending, unless it's eliminated, would remain, and we would have to have a new revenue source.
Right. As the board will remember, with Mrs. Scher and I, that we had gone through the budget, and those items that we could transfer into fund balance, we did during the year with budget transfers.
Also revenue-generating issues, changes that we made.
Right.
Work to our advantage.
Mr. Shelley?
No question.
Okay, one question, Mr. Kelly. Total revenue from other financial sources, there's receipts from LEAs in Pennsylvania. You're looking at
Yes.
$70,000. That represents how many students being educated that are not ours?
I'll defer that to
I
Mrs.
didn't
Clark.
hear the end of your question.
The number of students that make up that $70,000.
What page are you on?
No, no.
Gosh. Summary of revenue from other financial sources.
What page? Bottom line.
R9.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
That's 70,000.
Don, of the 1305 students, we have 28 that are currently make up part of that total. And then our 1306 students, we currently have 20. The differentiation between the 1305 and 1306 students are non-resident students that are placed by an agency in the home of a resident constitutes the 1305. The 1306 are those children that are put in some kind of institution in the community.
Okay, my concern is that you're getting receipts of $70,000, but that doesn't cover what it costs to educate these children in the North Penn School District. The cost per child is what now, $7,800, $7,900?
Well, we are receiving, Mrs. Mango, our daily tuition rate for the number of days. Not all these students are here the entire year. What's done at the end of the year, we bill out based on the number of days that they've existed in this district.
They may be here a half a year or a quarter of a year, but most of them are not here for a total year.
And it's based on
It's
a per
based
diem
on
rate,
days.
what it costs to educate a child in North Penn.
Right.
Right. In fact, it's based on our actual rate that the state verifies.
That's your
That's the
ADMs?
rate we charge.
Right, and everything gets processed through the state, and they check to see for the number of days that they're here.
Are there any monies at this point in time that are paid to us by, say, particularly Philadelphia School District, for foster children that are in the North Penn School District but come out of Philadelphia?
We do billing to
We
Philadelphia,
did bill
too.
Philadelphia.
Yes,
I
we
remember
did.
we did bill Philadelphia. I couldn't
How
tell you how
successful
many
are your
kids. I could
collection?
look that up.
I will tell you that we've been very successful with the collections. Fortunately, Marilyn Williams and Dottie Hatfield work together. They will send out bill after bill after bill, and Marilyn tends to really dog those bills. So we've gotten all of them, except maybe 2 or 3 that are outstanding right now.
Right. We had, if I remember, Mrs. Clark, we had a big fight with Philadelphia, but we finally got their money. It took us a while, but we did get their money. They don't part with it easily.
Okay, and what about other areas that send foster children into this homes in North Penn?
We haven't had much trouble with that because, again, those districts are also billing us if our kids appear somewhere else. So everyone's interested in getting the money. It hasn't been that difficult.
Do we bill them for the $7,800 or?
We bill them for the days the children reside here in the school district.
So then we take the $7,800, divide it by 180,
By
determine what our daily
by their
cost.
average daily membership. If they're here 28 days, if they're here 32 days. That's how we do the
What
billing.
if that child's special ed? Same rate?
Yeah.
Or do we get what it will cost for a
We don't-
special ed student?
Well, then they get included in our special ed count, which is generated by Penn Data, so we pick up some additional money there. We get the full complement, you just don't get it by the same funding source.
Alrighty.
If I just want
Sure.
$70,000, now that represents what we get from the state for these children?
Yes.
No, not
From
from
the
the state,
districts,
from
I'm
the
sorry, from the
individual
district.
districts pays, Mr. Moniz. Like, I would bill Wissahickon, I would bill,
Okay. So then I
Upper
guess
Dublin.
so then I guess my question is, we're not losing money on this?
We haven't lost money on this, except for the few bills that haven't been paid yet.
Right, okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, questions on revenue. If you have any questions on the revenue picture brought to you at this time by Mr. Kelly, please raise your hand, name and address.
Jerry Vigilante, Hatfield Township. On page R5, the real estate taxes. First question, is Line Lexington in Hatfield Township?
say that again?
Is Line Lexington in Hatfield Township?
No, Line Lexington is a small portion of Bucks County that
It is in Bucks.
historically, when this district was founded, was assigned to North.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Anybody else, please? The revenue picture? Yes, Mr. Sierpinski.
Dennis, I just need some clarification. My name is Vince Sierpinski from Talmadge Township. The increase or the gain the district is going to get in the value of a mill, how much is that?
It's on page R5, it's going up to $288,100.
So that gives us a net gain of what, about 830,000?
Yes, that would be close.
Okay. And Dr. Hassler, is the salaries that are in this budget under the current contract or the proposed contract?
The salaries that are under this contract are under the current contract.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else, please?
Is there a question?
I've confirmed with Dennis twice that there is $980,000 of funding for personnel and for MPA increases.
Yes, the salaries reflect the savings.
Reflects a proposed tentative
Tentative savings.
agreement.
So is it under the current contract or the...
Mr. Sierpinski, would you come back to the podium? Go ahead, Mr. Sher, you have the floor, say whatever you wish.
Simply that, in confirming with Dennis exactly what the personnel levels are spending in here are, that this budget reflects a total of $980,000, maybe some odd $100 in MPEA salaried employee increases.
Right. That was my question, because when I did the
Okay.
math, it seemed a little light under the current contract. That's why I was asking. So it's under the proposed contract?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Anybody else, please? Alrighty, thank you. Mr. Kelly, continue on.
I'd like to continue on page 1, as where we left off, with our expenditures. The pie chart at the top shows how our expenditures are broken down. Salaries, benefits, leading all the way over to the last 4% for other. When you look on page 1, under the budget column, and I'm going budget to budget here, it shows an increase in salaries of 5.9%. In benefits, it shows an increase of 6.6%. Benefits is an interesting story this year because currently our Blue Cross rate is coming in at about 12% increase. We're waiting to hear from them if they said sometime by mid-April if there are any adjustments to it, they'd be making them. We had some high claims this year, but in looking at the other consortium members, the other districts in Montgomery County, the increases ranged anywhere from 6% all the way up to 30%. So we fell somewhere in the middle at 12%. We also, but this is where the savings came in, as in Dr. Hassler in his opening statement, this is where the retirement benefit comes in. So while we had an increase of 16%, we also had a savings in our retirement rate of approximately $1 million. The 300 series, professional and technical services, that's showing an increase of 29%. That will be explained as we go along. A lot of that deals with in the staff development area, but we will get into that. We will get into that as we go through this budget. Property services is negligible. I mean, that we're going from 269 to 270. There's a 3.3% increase in other services. We've had some increases in tuition that we're paying out for alternative ed, for other items, and I know Mrs. Clark is going to discuss that later this evening. Supplies is showing a 4.3% increase. The majority of that increase is based on the new language arts textbook adoption in the area of $472,000. Dr. Hassler will be going over that with you a little later. Our equipment seems to be really skyrocketing, going from $553,000 up to $1.4 million. But I need the board to remember that there's $410,000 in there for new buses and vans, and Mr. Wood will be discussing that later on in the process when we get to the transportation area. But I feel you were all aware of that. When you take that amount out, you can see we're about at the same level in the equipment area as we were last year. Our last two items, 800 and 900, other objects and other financing uses. This is where we're seeing the savings due to the sale of the Keenest Road property. This was the year, if you remember from our debt service schedule, that we were due to jump up to $7.7 million. That $1.3 million is keeping us even with last year and reflecting a savings. So the increase there is negligible also. As I said, it shows budget to budget an increase of about 5.8%. At that point, I would like to stop and see if there's any questions on that point, and then turn it back over to Dr. Hassler.
Okay. Board questions to the right, Mr. Schilling.
No, I don't have.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Sherman.
Yes. Again, Mr. Kelly, with this 112, we're on page 1 and staying right there.
Yes.
We have estimated expenses of 112,771,864, so 112.7 million on this 1.8. In
Mr. Sherry, you have to
expenditures.
speak up. We can't hear you.
In expenditures.
Yes.
And when we go to back to our revenue page, we have 107.9 million on page R2 of the revenues. Does that difference between the two reflect for us what difference in revenues we would need to compensate for at the end if we were not to change spending prior to any increases?
The difference between them, Mrs. Sherr, is our estimated closing fund balance.
Well, the 1.5, but we would need to reserve that for our future budget also.
That's correct, but I mean, what makes that up is that the 4.8 million is the 1.5 budget reserve plus the 3.3
Correct.
in other.
But once spent, it's gone. So what I'm trying to say
You're
is
correct.
as we
Once spent, it's gone unless it's replenished during this year, unless we have another.
And that would be essentially a beginning deficit, for lack of a better word, between
Yes, it
revenues
would.
and expenditures going into the next year prior to any increases in the budget.
That's correct.
And
As I've said, I mean, we've been very lucky this year. We've had a
Right.
lot of positive things happen with the retirement
Absolutely.
rate, with Keenest Road sale. If those situations had not taken place, we'd be looking at a heck of a lot more than 5.9 mils.
out of the 1.2.7, I see that we would basically have $111.27 million in actual dedicated expenditures within the budget,
That's correct.
because of the fund balance is certainly undedicated money that we anticipate having at the end of the year.
That's right.
We're moving from 103.75 million in actual estimated expenditures for this current year. So as we go forward, we've got to deal with approximately $7.5 million in new spending, correct?
That's correct.
As we go forward, I would like to see a transmittal sheet that explains for us by object, for instance, the personnel area, the salaries, a $4.1 million increase that's dedicated here from what we estimate 96, 97 to be closing out at versus what the 97, 98 budget indicates our funding needs would be. And I guess it relates to Mr. Shapinsky's question. I thought we should wait for this page to occur first. But with $4.1 million there in personnel salaries only, I've been able to account for an MPEA salary increase of $980,000. It's my understanding there's approximately $1.4 million in additional staff requests that
Yes,
are part of this proposed budget.
That's correct.
I can estimate what the increases are in here for the administration and the support staff, but I've still got a gap of about $1.5 million. So I would like to see someone between your office and Judy's, please just give us a transmittal sheet that explains that $4.1 additional dollars, million additional
That would be no
dollars
problem.
that are
Dr.
being
Moran,
asked
I'll do that
for, without us having to piecemeal every department together. And as again, with the other bulk areas, the $1.1 million in benefits, is that strictly Blue Cross and Blue Shield increases?
That's the majority of it, Mrs. Sharp. The rest of it, there's a small increase based on the same percentage of salary increase in Social Security, but then there's also the reduction due to retirement.
I think we all need to note that it was a 12% increase, I believe, on these benefit expenses.
That's correct.
For this year. And we have no additional gain in the copay for our staff, correct?
That's correct.
Coming into this. So there's no new revenues, and we're dealing with the level copay despite these increases. Okay, just so the board's conscientious of those factors as we move forward. Thank you.
Mr. White?
No questions.
Mr. Clemens?
I'd like to try to re-clarify the question that Mr. Shapinsky asked. I think it was a good question. I just need to hear it again to make sure I restate it, that I'm clear on it. This list, what we have and what's available to the public now, this contains the current, not the current, this contains the proposed early settlement. Correct? Correct. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to make sure.
Care to say something?
Because we did get it, we got, the board members got a letter from Dr. Bose earlier, okay?
Right.
And I just want to clarify, and that letter confirms what Mrs. Scher said, if it reflects a savings of about $958,350. You said about $950, right?
I think about
Right.
$980 is in the budget.
Okay, whatever, so, I think for the public, they should know that if it was not included in here, the one that's on the table right now, how many more mills would there be? And I believe it's somewhere around 3.
It's approximately 3, Mr. Clemens,
It would be
at 288.
9.2 versus 5.9
Okay.
if the additional savings.
So this budget has what offer is on the table today. If that doesn't go through, we're looking at 3 more additional mills if we would live with this budget.
That's correct.
Okay. No other
Mrs.
questions?
Miller, Dr. Miller, you want to say?
Mr. Clemens, what we originally did, and the reason I answered as I did before, was that when we first configured the salaries, we configured them on the current contract. And then after the proposed contract was placed in front of us, we configured the savings and placed that in this budget. So the reality is it is the proposed contract.
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to take the opportunity to remind the board that despite the fact that you're here to fully and completely disclose all matters of financial interest in this district, I also have to remind you at the same time to be careful of hallowed ground known as labor negotiations, and that we need to respect that at all times, regardless of your personal opinions. And I would ask that you do so, because it's called a tentative agreement for a very good reason, and that it is quite tentative. So I'd ask you to be careful in your questioning, that you do not walk upon labor negotiations areas and details. Thank you. Any further questions, Mr. Clemens?
Just wanted to try to clarify, because I didn't think that Mr.
No, that was fine.
Shapinsky got a real clear answer.
That was very fine. Mr. Hill?
No questions.
Mr. Allen?
No.
Mr. Mosey?
Yes, just, Dennis, 800 other objects and 900 other finance uses. You're saying that they both reflect Keenest Road, or I was
I'm sorry.
about your
In
explanation?
the 800, 900, Mr. Mosey, that's where you, as we get into that, and I'll show you, the 800, 900 contain the interest and the principal on our debt service.
Okay.
That's where we're seeing is, it was supposed to jump up this year to 7.7 million with the sale of Keenest Road. That kept that reduction down by 1.3 million.
but we're still seeing an increase of $2 million on 800. You estimated for 96 and 97 4.5, and we're looking for a budget of 6.5 for 96, 97, 98.
That's correct. It keeps the budget. Well, it keeps the budget the same. That's why the budget should have jumped up. See the 6, 7, that one.
Okay. You're saying it would have been larger then?
That's correct.
That 6.5 would have been 8.5?
That's correct. And when we get to that point, I will be showing you the actual debt service schedule. I'll be providing the board with that schedule that shows that.
Thank you. That's all, Mr.
Okay, Mr. Kelly, your sale conditions on Keenest Road, I've taken into consideration that settlement date is anticipated for when?
For November, I'm told November 1st.
November 1st, 97.
Yes, and I've worked with Mr. Bradbury, and he assured me that we will realize that $1.3 million savings in this fiscal year.
As long as the settlement date holds true.
That's correct.
Okay. If the settlement date is moved up 1 month, 2 months, for some act of God, then we will be
Mr.
given...
Bradbury feels secure that if we get it before December 31st, that we'll still realize that savings.
Very good, but if it's even earlier than that, you'll come back with us with the increase.
That's correct. If it goes past January 1st, I will be back, or someone will be back to the board.
No, if it's before November 1st, if we settle September, there's an increased savings that we would want to hear about.
No, there won't be any increased savings, but we'll still realize the $1.3 million.
I see.
Highly improbable.
I see. Okay, the other thing too is we talk about Keenest Road savings as if it's a one-time deal, and it is my understanding we have savings that would be realized year after year.
That's correct, Mrs. Mingle. That will be year after year.
Okay, very good. Questions from the community? Anybody? Ladies and gentlemen, anybody? Okay, thank you. Dr. Hassan, if you want to move on.
Yes. Parts 3 and 4 on your agenda deal with per pupil allocations. And what these items will do will give you some background information regarding how various portions of the budget are developed by building administrators. And we'll start with the per pupil allocations. Basically, this covers in your budget area those areas of supplies, replacement texts, AV supplies, library supplies, and library books. Each building is given a per pupil allocation, and it's up to the discretion of the administrator to spread that allocation amongst those areas. And Dr. Clark and Mr. Kelly will elaborate on the per pupil expenditures.
The Cabinet has had numerous discussions regarding how to calculate the per pupil allocations. If you recall, traditionally, we've used the PEL mid-range projections. However, when we discussed enrollment, we were all concerned that the PEL mid-range projections have been somewhat off the last 2 years. When we looked at the enrollment for next year, we calculated the numbers 3 different ways. The first way, and if you recall when I talked about elementary enrollments, we touched on some of this. We used the straight line projection where we replicated kindergarten, and this gave us a net enrollment increase to 13,037 for next year. The second way we calculated the enrollment was to use the straight line projections replicating first grade. This gave us a net enrollment for next year of 13,165. We took a real critical look at the PEL mid-range, and they have us projected at 13,448, which is really off. That would show a net increase of over 600 children, which we have not seen year to year. We've been really growing at a rate of about 300 some children a year. So when we selected the one to use to begin building this budget, we used the second one where we replicated the first grade, which gave us a net enrollment of 13,165. It's a more conservative estimate than we have ever used in the past when we were calculating these enrollments, but it seems closer to reality for what we've been seeing year to year. So I wanted to make that clear because every other year that I have been here, we have used the PEL mid-range projection. So this is a departure from that. Also, the special ed and gifted enrollments, you have to understand that we take this at a moment in time And we looked at this in December, and you'll see those enrollments split out. We had about 900 some gifted, 900 special education. We've already grown since that time. However, we compensate for those children. We do receive some federal money that funnels through the IU, called 89-313 funds, which run about $27,000 a school year. So that's how we make up the difference, because those special education numbers and gifted numbers are fluid, and they change on a day-to-day basis. I'll turn it over to Bob and Dennis to talk about how we calculated the money portion of the per pupil.
The money portion, the $53.60, the $13.40, and $26.73 have been standard here at North Penn. We have not increased them over the past 3 years. The principals, this is their one attempt at more or less site-based management, where they have the option of taking the dollars shown there by school and spending it in the areas of regular ed books and supplies, special ed books and supplies, AV supplies, and library books and supplies. They have the option of spreading it out how they see the needs of their particular school. This year as a cabinet, we talked and we looked, and working with Art, we looked at some of the amounts that were left in supply accounts, and as a show of good faith to the board, we've already cut that back 10%. We feel we can do without 10%, looking at what the balances were left at last year. So we've already started at that point, so I think that's important for the board to know.
All right. Okay, board questions starting to the left, Mr. Mosey.
Yes, Dennis. You took, go back over the supplies thing again, if you will, please.
Sure.
You took money that was left in the accounts.
No, I looked, Mr. Mosey, at what, when we're doing the budget, where we do the estimates, and I was just looking at the amounts of money that were unspent.
Right.
At that point, and looking at some of the purchase orders that have been coming through.
Right.
And I thought, especially this being a tight budget year, that we could actually do a 10% cutback.
Now, the 10% cut, was that a 10% cut over what they got last year?
That's correct.
Or was it 10% cut over what they requested this year?
It's 10% over what they got this year. That's
They
based on
requested
what
this
they
year.
request. Well, over the amount shown on the right-hand column, Mr. Mosey, based on their projected enrollment.
It's a fixed amount.
It's a fixed amount, right.
So, just as an example here, taking York Elementary, that $15,985.57.
Yes.
That's 10% less than they got last year?
No. We cut $1,598 out of that. This is the allocation that went out to these schools originally.
Oh, okay. So then this $876,751 figure.
That will be reduced by, yes, you can reduce that by 10%. That's correct.
Thank you. That's all.
That was a question that you had asked me today, Mr. President.
Yes.
Mr. Allen.
Dennis, on all of these, the proposed reading language arts purchase, is that included in these numbers?
Yes, Mr. Allen, if you go to page 10. Oh, I'm sorry, in the allocation numbers?
Yes.
No, sir, that's items such as that, special textbook adoptions, and the purchase of books for additional students, that comes out of a separate fund. That's a separate line item. Dr. Hassler will go over that when he goes over books and supplies.
Thank you.
I think that's listed as special funding, which means it would be outside the allocation.
Right.
No more questions.
Okay, Mr. Hill.
None.
Mr. Clemens.
Projection is $13,165. What was 10th day this year?
10th day this year was $12,857. That's, if you subtract that, that's 308 student difference
Okay.
next year.
That's all.
Okay. Mr. White.
No questions.
Okay, sir. Mrs. Sher.
Dennis, question, do you have what we budgeted last year, what we used as our enrollment base for the whole budget process?
We used the
We
mid-range.
used mid-range PEL last year.
Okay.
I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember what that.
That's okay, I have my book here.
I have it.
In other words, the mid-range that was projected could actually have, and we budgeted for last year, could have been even higher than what we're estimating coming in this year, or somewhere similar. correct?
Say that again. It's
You
higher than
used-
13,165, you mean?
I said it could be or very similar. It may not have had a 308 student difference.
Last year, the mid-range was projected at 13,128.
Okay. And that, you used the 13,128 when we budgeted last year, correct?
Yes.
And so this year we're moving and we're budgeting for 13,165. I think your formula is, while it may be conservative, I think it's much more accurate. For my own purposes, looking at it, I thought it was better to take the difference in their projected growth from year to year. Forget if they were off the mark, we're not going to recover those kids necessarily the following year. And they were projecting, I think, a 320 student gain if their last year's numbers had been correct. And I think it's more the rate of growth that you might want to put your faith in instead of thinking you're going to catch up and suddenly absorb all those students that didn't happen the previous year.
Well, that was why we did it a different way this year, but we have
Right.
traditionally, past 6 years, done it with the PEL mid-range.
Well, and we can see how off we were. I mean, we were allocating for far more students than were actually realized year after year. When I look at these numbers, I believe it's correct to say that the total number of students is multiplied by the top allocation, whether it's $53.60 or what have you. And then with the gifted and the special ed, those are supplements,
Right.
correct?
It's a quarter, 1 1/4 for gifted and 1 1/2 for special education.
That's additional funds so that no one misunderstands us and thinks that while we're allocating $53.60 for a regular ed student, we're then dropping it down. It's actually additional funding that's designated.
Yeah, we have
for
to
that
show in our
body.
budgets that through
Right.
differentiated curriculum, we're providing a different type
Right.
of programming for gifted and special education in terms of materials. That's why it's set up that way.
That's okay, I don't disagree with it, I just think that everyone should understand that it isn't that they're being reduced, that's a supplement
That's the way it's always
allocation
been done.
that's being done for them. Okay, are these numbers that we use, the 13,165 population projections, student population projection, what drove the full budget document?
Yes.
Essentially, beyond these allocations and
Yes.
supplies? That is what, okay, thank you.
Mr. Schilling?
No question.
Okay, Mr. Wood, I guess my concern is when the board takes a tough line that it's a 10% slash in all spending of this nature across the board, what happens from here to the end of the year? Now that that's out there, do we have a stampede shoppers or with a balanced
No,
accounts?
we can actually control that. Dennis had established a cutoff date whereby purchase orders had to be in. And right now, at this point, we're only processing emergency purchase orders. So it's not a case if you have a fund balance that
Okay.
you can run out and spend it in the month.
After hearing this board meeting, that, you run out and spend your money.
That was March 1st. March 1st, that was it.
So no.
That's right, unless it was something of a dire emergency.
If it is school since September, how dire could it be? All right.
Are we getting a lot of purchase orders now?
No, that's we got a flurry of them toward the end of February, but a couple that have come in I've sent back. I've just said too late and sent it back.
That's fair. Alrighty, we got all board questions. Ladies and gentlemen, anybody from the audience up to this point? Anybody? Okay, Dr. Haskell.
If you look at item number 4 on the agenda, it's equipment per pupil allocation, and that's on the next page also in your packet, on the back of the regular per pupil allocation. Let me explain this a little bit in detail, because this is the first year that we've attempted to use a per pupil allocation in the area of equipment. And when I say equipment, this deals with equipment that we consider classroom or instructional equipment. It wouldn't be the equipment that Mr. Wood would address regarding buses, etc. As I said, this was a new process, and it actually took place in the midst of our budgeting process. We felt it's a better method to begin to more closely review the equipment needs and requests throughout the district, and to ensure equality from building to building, and also to have a better handle on equipment purchases. Because of the additional work in the format, the new format, and also since this area includes areas beyond what we'll be talking tonight. In other words, the equipment allocation that we're looking at includes the regular ed program in the 1100s, the audio-visual equipment, library equipment, principal's office equipment, and student activities. And since we're just presenting this for the first time tonight, you may want to review it, and we can definitely come back to this when we hit each one of those areas or in total. The reason why we went to this this year, as I said, initially was to get a better handle on equipment, and also because when the first wave of budget returns came back from the buildings, we were up 120% over last year's equipment budget, and we knew that was not going to fly. So we thought that since this per pupil expenditure in the regular ed accounts that Dr. Clark talked about works effectively, we would look at the same thing in equipment. And basically what we did is we took a look at the day-to-day equipment. We backed out any equipment that might be related to a bond issue yet, and we also backed out all of the technology that may have come in under equipment. Those two reasons are the reasons why it came in at 120%. Each building said this is what we need in technology until the plan is approved. We came up with a formula first time around, and what we did is we looked at the equipment from last year, and we felt that we didn't overexpend in the area of instructional equipment, and we felt that a 3% increase was not uncalled for. So we added 3% to approximately a total of $93,000 and divided by the current enrollment at that time. And as you look and at the per pupil expenditure, we're looking at $2.45 per student at the elementary level and $14.95 at the secondary level. Big discrepancy, but it's based on the types of programs and equipment that are purchased at those levels, and also the number of students at each one of the middle schools and at the high school. We actually adjusted that up a bit. We felt that, I think we adjusted it up $1. In historic, as we looked at the history of this account, the average was about $1.45 at elementary and about $15.95 at secondary. So we made a tiny bit of an adjustment. And again, this is what was used. And what we did was send these allocations back to each of the building principals and ask them to review their submission and prioritize what they felt would fit in this allocation. We also asked them to pull out any items that we felt were maybe capital expenditures, such as cafeteria tables, such as stage curtains, so it wouldn't eat up their whole allocation. And that's addressed in another part of the budget. The pages that follow this in your packet will indicate by building the allocation for the per pupil equipment expenditure, and also then each of the requests from each of the buildings and a rationale. And as I said, this addresses more than the regular ed budget for tonight, and I'm not sure that you want to delve into it tonight. You want to take a look at it. We can come back to it at a later date. But I'll entertain any questions on how we made the transition to this type of an allocation.
Well, this is the most detail I've ever seen in 5 years for requests for equipment like this. This looks pretty good. Board questions to the right, Mr. Schoen.
How does this reflect like last year's? I know it's different, but how can you compare it to last year's in regards to increase?
Well, we're up we added 3% to the total expenditures last year. I would say the difference is basically how the principals then went about deciding what.
But it's about 3%.
3%. It is 3%.
Okay.
I think, John, another explanation that is helpful and really brings a feeling of equity into this process, and that's why we work so hard putting it together, is now each building has an allocation based on their enrollment. Whereas last year, you could have a building that would be very lopsided, taking a large amount of the dollars that were set aside in elementary, for example. So now, based on your enrollment, there is equity in the process.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Wood, pull that microphone out from under Mr. Moses' coat. Okay, very good. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, before we continue to go around, I just want to mention that, as Dr. Hassler had said, that at any point in time, you feel that you need more time to look at this. There isn't anything that I'm not willing to bring back later, that we will actually do that at any given point in time. Put back onto the agenda of the budget hearings past materials. It doesn't mean that if you have a question a week from now on material being shown tonight, it doesn't mean that it can't be answered, it can't be back on the floor. We'll review this as often as you need. Mrs. Sharp.
Just back to that, I note that we also have a meeting that's general budget discussion Tuesday, May 6th. And at that time was probably when we would be dealing with all the miscellaneous and wrapping up final consensus on various items. So if the public watches this as we begin, and it doesn't seem like we're redlining like things right now, this is really the beginning where we gather the information, and that is yet to come. And one of the primary meetings for that is May 6th, and you may want to take note of that, where possible reserve it for that time. I guess the only thing I'd say, Art and even Judy, when we deal with these ratios, is there a problem because we have schools of different age? And I've always asked about an adjustment to be made or allowed for the fact that new schools often have a greater level of beginning equipment, more updated equipment and less need
I can
than some
address
of our
that.
older
We look
schools,
very
and I don't see it.
We look very closely at the allocations and what the requests were from the newer schools, knowing that they received, in most recent times, a large shot of equipment. So before we approved their allocation, we may have gone back and taken some out. As you get a chance to look at each of the buildings, you'll see that in some cases, the allocation, if you total up their requests underneath the allocation, does not total up to that allocation. So we were able to take some of the dollars and give it to some of the schools who may be more needy.
Okay, so there was some consideration of that given as we did this, because we all know there are some schools that just really have greater needs, whether it's because of changes in their population that's occurred or that they were never formally equipped to handle the level of student body that they now host for us.
And another a
Thank
good
you.
example of that
I'm
is
glad.
also Penndale Middle School, where there was a lot of equipment we could still attach to the bond issue. So we
Right.
were able to save dollars there in their allocation.
As opposed to Penfield and Pembroke, which really hasn't,
But another good example, I think, if you look at
super.
Bridle Path Elementary School, you'll see an allocation of 1705, but yet you'll see a very specialized piece of equipment that wasn't bought with bond funds initially, but is now being requested by the staff, and that is a FlexCam teaching camera that attaches to microscopes, so that it substantiates your concern that they would open initially when the building was new with everything that they needed, and we wouldn't now be buying basic equipment, but we would be doing something specialized.
Right, but that's also something for parents to take into consideration, that these dollars are placed in the hands of the principals and the building level staff. And as far as establishing the spending priorities, that's right there at the site-based decision-making, correct?
That's true.
So that, you see the X number of dollars and someone thinks that there's something very basic that we've chosen not to fund. Well, we've designated the dollars and they've chosen where to place that money. So, thank you very much.
Mr. Weiss.
I appreciate the new approach to allocating funds for equipment, but I am curious what constitutes the other 117% that was backed out that could be added to a bond fund or something else. That is just a curiosity to understand what kind of equipment the buildings are requesting, to understand what they feel they need to carry out their programs.
A perfect example of that, as an example, is a new sink for the dark room at the high school, which is desperately needed, but an item that's $8,500. In our discussion, that's absolutely a legitimate purchase under the bond issue as part of the high school renovation and addition. So we back that type of thing out. And they're large ticket items. I mean, the original sink has been there since '71. And it absolutely needs to be replaced, and we'll probably do that this summer. But that's an $8,500 expenditure is a perfect example.
Well, I understand that. Again, my curiosity was, what were some of those items? I would like to know what some of those items were. Not to throw them back in, but to understand
We did a whole
in some
list.
types of general categories what the buildings are looking for. I'd
We
be
broke it
curious to
out,
see what they
Mr.
are.
White's, in two lists. The rest of what I call general equipment, and then a second list of all technology equipment that we plan to give to Mr. Weir for use with the technology program, or whatever comes out from that.
I'd
We
like-
can certainly
I'd like
provide
to
you
see
with
those
those two
lists.
lists.
When will they be produced and
I
brought
can have them
forward?
tomorrow. We already have them done.
When will they fit into the budget hearings?
Well,
When
that's
do they
stuff,
best
Mrs.
fit in?
Mingle, that was pulled, so
But we
I
always
don't know
do
how they
this.
fit in.
We're going to have a bond addendum report or anything like that? Where we've done that in the past, capital projects under bonds?
Right, no, Mr. Bradbury's doing a report on refinancing, but that, to my knowledge, has nothing to do with equipment. You're kind of losing me on.
Okay, why don't
This is
you,
a-
for the next hearing,
Yes.
why don't you produce both of those documents?
Okay.
Get it out to the board members. You said you could do that by tomorrow?
Yes, we can.
If you would do that, that'd be great. We'll have that, and we'll address that.
Oh, fine,
At the
okay.
next hearing, we'll place that on the agenda. Mr. Where would you make that? Okay, it's taken care of. Any further
Thank
questions,
you.
Mr. White?
No further questions.
Okay, Mr. Clemens.
I'd like to just take that comment a little bit further. At the next hearing, next budget hearing, would we talk then, would that be appropriate time to talk about whether this board would be interested in putting money in as a let's say for technology, instead of technology, a bond, going for a bond, where this board was willing to pick a number, a couple $100,000 in, where we paid cash out of the budget for those items? Is that what we're going to discuss that?
I don't think that, no. I think Mr. White's is just asking Tom, he wants to see the total list, in other words.
Yeah, but my guess is that that list
What Mr.
of
Kelly
that-
said is each school submitted the wish list.
But my guess in
And then
that wish
items were
list is
taken
probably
out.
going to be technology stuff.
Well, we've done two separate ones. We have what I call general equipment, and then we pulled the technology items out and put them all on one list also.
There's two lists.
There's two lists, but neither of the dollars are in this document at all. That's all the items that were pulled from the list.
Okay, Mr.
Just
Chair,
so
you
we're
have a
clear on
suggestion?
Yes, I do. Because we had worked so hard trying to be able to keep this within 3-hour meetings, 10 o'clock, 10:30 closures, and we already began this one a little bit behind by having to do what was not done last week. The next scheduled meeting on April 10th is a very busy schedule also, and it may have leftover business from this tonight's scheduled agenda. So I would like to ask if we could consider April 29th for additional items, because that budget meeting only contains two categories at this point, student activities and community services. And rather than upend all the rest by injecting new topics into a very busy schedule that's already established, could you please consider
Okay,
April
so there's-
29th for this,
There's
for new
only
business?
two items on that evening. There's an opportunity then for those two lists to be produced and discussed at that time as requested by Mr. White. And I also hear Mr. Clements requesting a discussion to be had by this board on a category for
I'll just call it cash for technology.
cash for technology. Would that work
I don't
into
know.
And I
the
would say
schedule?
April 29th, and that way we have an opportunity to pull that together, or at least gather from David also. I haven't heard, finance has not had a meeting with technology at this point.
Well, Mr. White, you heard that.
I don't know if I had any direction. I thought we were going to have more discussions. The presentation was made. There were questions from board members. I thought we were going to have another discussion about that, because there was no chance for me to rebut any of the, for lack of a better term, criticisms of the plan to be able to understand how we could move forward at all.
Okay, Mr. White, I think you need another meeting with your full committee. Would you consider between now and the 29th doing that? Also, seeing if your committee, or at least yourself, representing your committee, would meet with Mrs. Sherr and Mr. Mosey, and that some of these preliminary discussions take place between a few of you before the 29th and bring some sort of a result or an understanding among all of you back to this board? Can you do that, Mr. White?
I'm not sure that entirely makes any sense until we've had a chance to decide what it is, or what parts of that plan, or the plan in its entirety is something that the board intends to adopt. To discuss money prior to the plan, I think we need to understand what the approach is
Okay.
to be able to allocate dollars to the plan.
Okay, I mentioned that your committee, your technology committee, meet again and to come to a recommendation from your committee. There's 4 members. And if you can come to some majority recommendation,
Well,
those recommendations
we did
go to
discuss
finance.
that prior to the presentation, and there was no consensus from the committee at that time. I don't think I'm going to get a consensus from the committee on the plan as a whole. I thought the board as a whole had to discuss that to be able to come up with a consensus.
I suppose we're at a catch-22. You're looking for a commitment to spending
No, I'm looking for a commitment to a plan.
dealing with the revenues, but yet I think the board would like to see if there's a way that between finance and technology, that all of that, those spending ideas could perhaps be connected to a revenue plan, and whether that be...
A revenue plan to what end?
Well, whether you're suggesting that you just want to go with straight dollar-for-dollar taxation of the community for your plan, or we've done some work, Dennis and I both have instituted the aspects of bond financing that now can be amortized according to the life of the item.
Shouldn't we decide what direction we want to take before we go to look for funding?
Well, I think the board would like to know what its funding, what the funding consequences are at the same time. Not, what are the options there? You're again.
Well, let me put it. I mean, the
the
plan had capital versus yearly expense. The plan had a map, if you will, for what could occur during a 3-year period. There were comments made during the presentation that we don't want to. Individual board members would have made comments such as, I think we need to get technology to the students first rather than doing it this way.
David, let me interject one thing here. I've had some discussions with Don and other people, because I don't want to get us off in a sidetrack tonight. I would like, David, if we could, your committee, which I'm part of, and Tom and Pat, if we could get together and talk about it a little bit and be prepared the next day or two to take it to the next level. I have some ideas. I think we can move it ahead, but I don't want to bring them to the table here right now. If you give me that, I want to talk to you tonight a little bit about it, Dave.
Another committee meeting of technology.
I just brought it up because I had to figure that 120%. A lot of that was technology. It said bond-related equipment, and it said technology. And I felt it was a good time to bring it up because I know Bill's been an advocate, and I will say I'm an advocate for us establishing a line item somewhere in the budget, and whether it be for technology or capital expense, that we would start paying for things with cash instead of getting bonds. Okay?
So it's resolved for April 29th, correct? So that Mr. Kelly, in any future publications of this meeting schedule, we will add bond expenses, proposed bond expenses, and technology, list technology as a specific
correct. And in the interim, I heard a commitment that
Okay.
technology is going to meet before the 29th to see if they can wrap up a consensus among themselves and bring it to this board back on the 29th. And if there is an opportunity to take a possible consensus to finance, if that can be arranged, that would help. If not, we have to do it on the 29th.
Mrs. Mengel, if I may interject as well. I don't know if Mr. Kelly will be here to do this or not, but I think we should have some kind of an impact study as to what a bond would do to our debt service as well.
Mr. Kelly, is that possible information for you to gather?
Yes, but I need to know an amount or what.
We need to need the product, different lifespans.
Okay, this is a finance problem. That's among yourselves.
It will work, okay.
All right. Are you through, Mr. Clemens?
I hope so.
You happy? Mr. Hill?
Yes. Yeah, that whole area has to be discussed, and I hadn't had a chance to talk to David and so forth about that, and I have some things we can move ahead on that. But I have some questions generally about the other parts of this, what we're trying to discuss right now, the equipment. I guess, putting technology aside, you told me there's 2 lists. There's this technology list we're going to put aside for right now. But there was a list like you indicated, in fact, in my tour of the buildings. I know one principal said we've got to replace these curtains on the stage and items like that.
That's under, yeah, Mr. Wood.
Those are included in the budget?
Later
The funding
on.
for those items are in the budget?
Where curtains are
So, but you were referring to a technology list and another list. That other list is already in the budget somewhere else.
But Dr.
Some of the items
Hassler
are.
also alluded, Don, to the fact that there's another part of the budget that you have in your hand that reflects those items.
Right.
All I'm trying to find out, that there are no other items laying out here in Never Land that are not in the budget except technology.
No, there are items that we consider to be buildings where we have bond expenditures.
High school, I understand you're going to roll that into the bond, but if one of our elementary schools, there's no bond appropriated for, needs something, that's already in the budget somewhere else.
Can't promise you that. there may be some items that are on the list.
Well,
Is there a third list?
I don't want something coming that's onto the table here
Yes.
somewhere, that's what I'm looking for.
In a sense, for example, a building may have asked for 15 new audio cassette recorders, and within their allocation, they could only purchase 10 this year. So they had to decide how to prioritize. You could call that a third list of
Well, no,
of
I mean,
instructional.
there's obviously a list, you only get 10.
Right.
I mean, there's something that a school definitely needs this year that we don't have in the budget, other than technology.
Depends who you ask that question.
You mentioned things
Huh?
like
Depends who you ask that question.
Well, I mean, you gotta have some reasonability to the question. I mean,
And we felt as a cabinet, we had reasonability. And
all right,
we
you
made
answer,
those
you answer questions, yes. I
Now,
mean,
the building principal wouldn't agree with
I'm not, that's another issue, that's another issue. All right. The other part of it, because I used to want something coming in the back door. The other thing you indicate here, this is a 3% increase over this $93,000 number. How did you determine that $93,000 number? By the same process you determined what the equipment, you went back to last year's budget and tried to pull all the equipment that fit in the same category, and so that was $93,000?
Exactly, but I think the cuts last year were probably more arbitrary, which is saying we needed to cut 10% or 20% or 30%. So, yes, but that's how we went back to those categories.
We
totaled
looked
it up.
historically, Don, at what had been spent.
So that's how you got to the $93,000 number.
Determined the $93,000 was a fair number.
Okay. I was looking at some of the items in there, because I'm close to some of these items, as I tour around the elementaries, the principals tell me everything they need. But, so I've got a kind of an insight, so I'm looking at some of these things in here, and some of them are not surprises. But one of the questions that I have, I guess, related to these things, without looking at them in detail, is any of these things that they're asking for within the curriculum, within the way we're running the school today? They're not buying any new item or new thing to branch off in this particular school in some other direction.
Well, we think that this process will begin to eliminate that if it did occur. That they really need to, and we need to scrutinize it more and also refine this whole process.
Okay, because I was finding different schools have different things and they're off on different tangents, but this budget reflects, these items reflect kind of a basic across the board thing.
Better than before, yes.
Okay. I did notice one thing, that particularly I have a warm feeling for York, and they have and I see they have the thing in here for their digital piano keyboard. They do definitely need that. That big wooden piano is tough to move around the floors. That's just a side comment. Up the steps. It's tough.
It was funny, Mr. Hill and I were at, what school were we at last week, I forget. And they had one of those keyboards, and Don mentioned to the principal, he said, don't let them see that down at York. He said, they're still pushing the big piano.
I have no other questions.
All right, Mr. Allen.
Thank you, yes. I would just like to emphasize that I agree with the concern that the older schools should get some little more priority and pupil allocation for equipment than the newer schools. I think that really has to be a consideration for a couple of years. Secondly, it's very nice to see the breakdown of equipment. And I would say it's the first year I've ever knowingly voted to buy cellos. Well, I assume cellos will stay. I'll make that assumption.
The sneakers go, right?
No, they better not go. Do the sneakers right where they're at.
Little shrouds. But other than that, it's very nice to see, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Mosey?
Yes. Since this is the first time we've seen this, Dr. Hassler, I hope you'll forgive my ignorance if my questions are a little bit mundane, but the allocation of $93,000, just adding up some of these allocations, we're well above that. So,
It's 3% above that.
okay, so if I take these allocation figures, if I take 3% of $93,000 and then I add those allocation figures, I should come out with the same number. Is that correct? Okay, secondly.
We did this morning.
Secondly, I see some items on here for science. For example, I see a small refrigerator for science at Penndale, and I see a this flex cam, teaching camera, Art's talking about a bridle path. Why couldn't those items have come out of the Merck Science Project?
Well,
Or their grants?
I mean, that's not an impossibility. In fact, I think what we need to do as we look at this more closely is be able to say we can pull that into the Merck.
Yeah, I think since there's
Especially since
science-
we just got a grant,
Right.
I forget what was the grant?
190-some thousand.
Additional dollars.
So I think that we ought to look at that. And just adding some of these figures, you're correct that what they're requesting does not add up to their allocation. What happens to that money?
Some of the other areas there.
That just stay there and they can use it sometime during the course of the year?
Well, in some cases, in other schools, they're over their allocation. So basically what we did when we got it is we looked at it and tried to take into consideration the school and also what they were purchasing, and in some cases it went over their allocation, sometimes it was under, so it kind of balanced out.
I guess what I'm asking is taking Gwen North, for example, they have an allocation of $1,572, and I see the items they're requesting, new and replacement, comes to $1,369. They will get $1,369, whatever is left of the $1,572 will go to a more needy school or whatever, I'm assuming.
Yes. And if there would be a couple dollars here or there, we
Right.
entertain some of those other requests that we weren't able to
I
fund.
don't think it's fair to tax taxpayers and create little sludge funds.
No, we won't.
I don't like that. Thank you.
And I think we really need to look at this and refine it to make
I
sure
will
we
I will
answer
say
the
this at
question.
face value, I do like the approach because, as I said to you on the phone yesterday, this is the kind of definitive breakdown I was looking for. Too many, last year we went through the budget and we got breakdowns of equipment. It was very difficult for this board member, and I am talking to some of my fellow board members, to try to tie the dollars back to the book, the master plan, so to speak. And I think with this, I like the explanation, I like the allocation idea, and it gives us as a board just where some of the dollars are going, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Mr. Hezzy. Mr. Wood, Penfield's allocation here, first item under new is a walkie-talkie set. Why would that item be, how's that beneficial to children? Why isn't it somewhere under adult dollars for it?
Well, what we're doing currently is not as efficient as what we can do when we have two-way communications.
Right.
And we're currently using pagers, and until the security person gets paged and goes to the closest phone. At Dale and the high school, we're using walkie-talkie, we're using a radio system. I can move that into the security budget if you want me to, but
I don't think that should come out of the kids' money.
I don't think so.
I'd like to see that pulled and pushed somewhere else. I don't think that's fair. Also, the tuba, $2,350. You have two tubas currently in use that are in fair condition, not effective to have them overhauled. What do you do with a fair condition tuba? Is there any sort of, what do you call it?
Give it to a kid who doesn't play with it.
That's his punishment, right? Here, play this. No, do we continue to use them, or do we trade them in, or what do we do with that?
We continue to use them to a point, and then they could.
Send on the metal shop?
They become sculptured typically.
That's what I thought.
They can be reconditioned because I played a percussion instrument, and they can be reconditioned to a very nice state. Seriously.
Yeah, but when you get to
So it's going to Mosey's house, right?
When you get to the cost of two
Not in my
tubas,
house.
we typically recondition trumpets,
Okay.
smaller instruments. But when you get a tuba, to take the dents out of it and recondition it to card form.
Some of these could have been overhauled a number of times, too.
Yeah, you never know. Okay. Okay. Art, I just want to say and repeat myself and repeat what all the other board members have said, and this is the most detail we've ever received, and we can tell that there's new hands on this budget. Not only yours, but Dr. Hassler's, Dr. Bowe's, and this is good to see. You're telling us where, you're telling us what, and you're telling us why. And I think that's all this board has ever really asked for, is as onerous and nagging as we can be. This is all we ever asked for. So I thank you. All righty. Board, community questions, anybody? Don't be shy. Anybody want to ask about that tube again? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Dr. Hassler.
We can move to the next part now, regular education, and Dr. Miller will take us through this part.
Okay, student cameraman, how much time do we have? Want to be helping? 20 minutes? You'll help me? Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Hassler. If I could call everyone's attention to the next page in your agenda packet, which is the personnel numbers report. This is the first time that we are doing numbers like this, I believe, as well. And what we decided that we felt would be beneficial for the board to have would be a look at the current 1996-97 numbers and see how they compared with what we are proposing in terms of staffing needs for the 1997-98 school year. Before I run over the differences, I would like to call your attention to an error. If you could move down the page to where it says staff nurses. If you look under the 96-97 section, part-time, it says 1, that should say 2. And the total should be 15. If you move the whole way across, then the full-time for 97-98 should be 15. Part-time stays 0. The total is 15, and it's still a net gain of 0.
Does this change the totals?
Yes, it'll change the totals at the bottom, and we will get a corrected copy to you. If you notice as you are looking over the sheet, you will see that there are 7 areas where there are differences in the number of staff that we have this year compared with what we are proposing for next year. Those areas include food service, which, as Mr. Wood and Mr. Kelly explained earlier, are really not part of this particular budget, but we wanted to reflect all of the personnel that we have in our district, and there will be a difference of 1 there. As we move down under the specialists area, you will notice that under TV, this year we have 1 television specialist. And next year, we are proposing to have an additional person, which Mr. Weir will talk about at a later session under his area of the budget. As we move down to support services, under classroom aides, this year we currently have 11 classroom aides, and we are proposing for next year that we need 12 for a net gain of 1. And we'll talk more about that, and Mrs. Clark will talk about more of that as we get into special education and, of course, regular education. Moving down to library clerks, there will be an addition of 1 person. And if you remember, Dr. Hassler was talking about the Future Plan Center. That particular position right now is currently funded by a grant which we are proposing to maintain, and that is the extra person that falls under that category. We didn't have any other place to put it on this particular list. Moving down, we have special education aides, and this year we have 58 aides currently, and we are proposing an addition of 6 more. And Mrs. Clark will be talking more about that when we get to special education needs. As we move to teachers, you will notice this year that we have a total of 849 teachers. That includes the full-time and the part-time together. For next year, we are proposing an increase of 807 to 878 for a total increase of 29 teachers, and when we get into the breakdown of regular education, I will talk about what they are. Dr. Hassler, in his opening remarks, broke those down a little bit. Under staff developers, this year, as you are aware, we have 1 staff developer. We are in need of an additional staff developer, so we are proposing to have 2 for next year, which of course is an increase of 1. And that brings our total to 40 additional staff that over the number that we had this past year. And with that in mind, I'd like to then move to the more detailed portion of the regular education staffing. As you are well aware, the purpose of tonight's presentation is to review regular and special education staffing needs for the next school year and to examine their impact on the overall budget. As Dr. Hassler stated earlier, it is important to remember that the impact of professional salaries will be affected by 2 major factors. One is the early retirement incentive program, and the other is the potential collective bargaining agreement with the North Penn Education Association. Currently, 12 people have submitted their letters and have been approved by the board to receive the early retirement incentive. The total savings to the district at this time looks as if it will be $215,380. However, it's important for us to note, and if you could look on the top of page 5 in your budget book, under the ASN number 11070, which is the ERIP category. This is regular page 5 now. You will see an estimated savings of $180,380, and you're probably wondering, well, that's not $215,380. The difference is this. When we were originally doing the budget, we didn't know how many people were going to sign up for the early retirement incentive. So we estimated that there would be 10, and obviously we came very close, but we still had 2 additional people. So since the document was printed and the board has approved these 12, we assume that there'll be an extra $35,000 in savings. Any additional savings that we have will depend on those who qualify and are approved by the board under the exception clause of the ERIP proposal. For this reason, the amount of savings is really not yet final. Also, the board and the NPEA are in the process of negotiating a new contract. The impact on the 1997-98 budget will depend on the terms of that contract. If savings do occur, they will have to be calculated at the time of the agreement. Until then, we are unable to determine the actual total cost of salaries for professional certified staff. With that in mind, I would like to present the staffing needs that we project for regular and special education. Mrs. Clark will provide further explanation of special education at a later portion of this evening. As I explain our needs, I will direct you to the place in your budget books where you will find each category. And this is a good time to let everybody know that we will be primarily working on pages 5, 4, 5, and the top of page 6. Those are the only pages that we'll be looking at. We'll begin with elementary education. If you look on the top of page 5 of your budget book, you will find ASN number 11072. This represents the category of additional elementary teachers. Last month, you will recall that there was a presentation on boundaries, modulars, and the teachers needed for next year. At that point, it was determined that for 1997-98, we would need 13.5 additional elementary teachers to maintain current class size guidelines. The projected cost of these 13.5 teachers is $499,500. We will also need 11 instructional aides at a cost of $133,650, and you will find this also on page 5, somewhere in the middle of the page, under the ASN number 11103. It's important for the board to know that the 13.5 teachers and the 11 aides are a package. If the number of teachers should change, so also will the number of aides have to change to accommodate the needs in our classes. In secondary education, I would direct you to the top of page 5. And there you will find ASN number 11073. This number represents the additional secondary teachers that we anticipate needing for next year. We think we will need 8 teachers. And the reason that I say think is that while with elementary education we can determine pretty exactly what our needs will be at this time, it is more difficult to do that with secondary because they are in the process of completing their tallies for next year in terms of scheduling. I called the principals as late as yesterday to get an update to find out from them when they would be able to make final recommendations to us. And they said that they feel within 3 weeks they should be able to have that completed, and we have scheduled a meeting for that time. This number could go down. On the other hand, it could go up. but for right now, we have estimated approximately 5.5 of the 8 to accommodate middle school needs and 2.5 to accommodate high school needs. The middle schools anticipate their needs in English, math, science, social studies, foreign language, and art, at least at this time. These secondary numbers, again, represent the best estimates that we can make based on early tallies. And principals will speak with us soon about the exact numbers. The cost of these 8 secondary teachers, as you can see in your budget books, comes to a total of $296,000. Other regular education salaries can be found on pages 4 and 5 of your book. If you notice, all of the schools are listed there, and the salaries for certified staff are listed from the top of page 4 all the way through page 5, beginning with ASN number 11004 through 11064, including 11102. These are the salaries of current certified staff, and of course they are based on the contract. I'd also like to call your attention to page 5, where you will see ASN numbers 11009 and 11100. These numbers represent our figures for degree improvement. And it's the amount of money that we need to pay teachers when they gain further credits. The reason that the number has increased over what was budgeted for last year is that, as you are aware, we have hired more beginning teachers this past year, and with the number of teachers that are retiring this year, we anticipate hiring more new teachers for next year. And therefore, because they are at the lower end of their years of experience, they are the ones who are going out and gaining many, many credits so that they can not only get permanently certified, but so that they can also improve themselves on the salary schedule. And by contract, they are entitled to this, and once they attain it, we are obligated to pay this to them. To cover this particular contractual mandate, we are budgeting a total of $420,000, $210,000 for elementary staff, and $210,000 for secondary staff. Along with degree improvement is tuition reimbursement, and you will find tuition reimbursement figures on page 6. There are 2 ASN numbers that I call your attention to, 11214 and 11215. These categories represent the money needed to reimburse elementary and secondary staff for approved graduate level courses taken for credit. This is also a contractual obligation between the district and North Penn Education Association. In terms of support staff, you will notice on those pages the following ASN numbers: 11102, 11105, 11107, 11114, 11113, which should have come first, and 11109. These are in the middle of pages 5 and 6, and at the top of page 6. All of these are support staff, and they represent a 2% increase in salary. They cover the areas of ESL aides, math support aides, relief aides, and lunchroom aides. The one I would particularly like to call your attention to are the lunchroom aides, which are 11109, because they would seem to show a large increase over the amount budgeted for 1996-97. However, that additional money does not represent additional people. It represents additional time needed so that cafeteria tables can be cleaned by the lunchroom aides. We figure approximately 15 minutes per person will be needed in the schedule in order to be able to accommodate that, in addition to the regular duties that the lunchroom aides perform in their buildings. And that concludes my report on regular education.
Okay, Dr. Miller, before you go any further, right there where you're at on lunchroom aides.
Yes.
Why are they not part of the cafeteria budget? Why are they in general fund?
They have never been part of the cafeteria budget because it's actually, the aid portion of it does not make them food service employees.
It's really, if I'm not mistaken, a kind of a guardian in the cafeteria, not so much in the food area, but they watch over the kids and kind of keep control. Discipline. Mhm.
Okay, well, I think if they're gonna start washing tables, I mean, I don't want this to sound union, but if they're gonna start washing tables, a piece of that should come out of food services budget. If they're not food handlers, then they're cleaning up after it. I think a piece should be pulled from the cafeteria and reimbursed the general fund. That's my opinion. If it's shared by other board members, that's great. If it's not, I understand.
Well,
Okay, board.
We
I'm
can
sorry.
certainly agree to pay the additional 15 minutes from food services.
Every board member's okay with that?
Yes, I agree with that.
Make that adjustment? It's that simple. Okay, board questions to the left, Mr. Mosey.
How many lunchroom aides are we talking about, Mrs. Simone?
29.
And I was looking at the ASN number 11103, Instructional Aides Elementary.
Yes.
How many do we have currently?
Currently, Mr. Mosey, we have 11.
And we're looking to add 11 more.
We're looking to add 12 more next year. One of the, there will be 11 that we originally proposed, plus one for a student who needs special services.
Okay. And I'm looking at page 4, and I'm looking at ASN numbers 11018, 1920, and 21. And it looks to me like they are new numbers, $1,403, 2118, 2116, 1656, and I don't see any previous expenditure for those particular ASN numbers.
Are you saying art, music, and phys ed?
Yeah, and reading. I see 4 items where we did not budget any money previously, but now we're budgeting about $7,000.
Mr. Mosey,
Or a million, rather. I'm sorry,
that's
7.
easily explained. These normally used to be included in each of the schools. The art teachers, the music teachers, the phys ed teachers, and the reading teachers, you would have normally seen in past years in the schools. But at an earlier point in time, some of the board members had requested of us that we take out in a separate category so that you could see the amount of money being spent on art, music, phys ed, and reading. And so we did that.
Pat, if you recall, we did request that at Dennis so that it
I
wasn't...
don't recall us requesting it. Maybe you did, Vicki. I did. I don't.
It was all categorized under regular ed. And
Okay.
it,
And I'm looking at account ASN number 11064, regular salary senior high school control account. I see a reduction in that. Is that because of the ERIP?
No.
I see 7 million is going down to 6 million.
No, the reduction that you see in
Is that
some
'cause
of
we
these
pulled art and
figures is
music?
because we pulled the art, music, phys ed, and well, in some schools' cases, reading.
That's all I have right now.
Okay, we don't, yeah, I don't want to interrupt any board member while they're speaking, so if we could change that tape now, sir. No pressure, love.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Allen.
I just wanted to make sure, that we've accounted for enough teachers to fill the modulars, the new modulars.
The new modulars, there will be 8, and we are asking in terms of elementary, 5.5 above that.
Okay, we'll cover it. Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Hill.
As a corollary to the question, I understand, and I've had some dialogue about the number of teachers before with you, but I understand that the 8 teachers, the 5.5 for the mid-school and the 2.5 at the high school are kind of guesstimates right now until you know what courses are taken to see what teachers you really need. And the number may go down and the number may go up as the course layout comes.
Yes.
We can be hopeful they all fit in what they have already and don't take any. But the ones I have a little problem with in understanding is the 13.5 in the elementary. Next year, we propose to have online 8 new modulars, and 8 new modulars reflects 8 new teachers. If we don't have any more classrooms than the 8, maybe some of the art rooms or some of the music rooms are going to become classrooms. How many more classrooms are we going to have next year? 13?
Don, when I had done the chart last month, when we talked about the boundaries and,
Right.
and what we need to do, if we continue to use the class size guidelines that were currently in place, and that was the administration recommendations, across the system to make that chart work, we needed 13.5 new teachers total. So that included the 8 modulars plus 5.5 positions above that, and there were spaces for all of those classes.
You have space? You have these other
Yes.
5 spaces?
Yes, I can bring back, if you would like, that chart again so you can look at that I presented last month, but we have classroom spaces for that. In the areas where we don't have classroom space, we had recommended the use of aides, and there were several hot spots that I discussed at that time. I don't have that chart with me tonight, but I can bring it for you.
That's not necessary. But it's the art and music rooms that are being eliminated to make the additional rooms.
Mostly. There are very few art and music rooms across the system, and even with those rooms, I had made the statement not to get too excited because some of those I'm going to use for special education. So we will probably system-wide have at the most 3 or 4 art and music rooms.
So I can reflect 13 teachers to 13 rooms.
Yes, they will all have a classroom.
Looking ahead a year, when NAP comes online with additional rooms, would that would mean additional teachers, or would that still, or would that some of that will art and music rooms come back?
Some of it restore. That's a hard question for me to answer.
I know, that's why I asked.
I
understand.
I have to take a look at that. We did take it a year further and just do some tentative projections with the 98-99 school year, but I couldn't give you that offhand.
All right. It's okay. That's all I had.
Okay, Mr. Clemens.
The URIP projecting 12.
Right now, we have exactly that many letters that the board approved in the last agenda.
Okay, so if we would go forward with this budget, then we would be hiring about 33, 34 new teachers for next year.
No, it's part of the 29.
Roughly.
I'd put 12 for the ERP, then 13.5 elementary, and 8 for secondary, came up to 33.5.
And 5 for special ed.
5 special, I'll write that out.
Plus anybody that we replace, they wouldn't be additional staff. The ERIP.
You're counting new hirings.
Right, the ERIP
That is
people
right, that's
are replacements, they're not additional staff.
Right, but I'm saying job position, there will be, well, with the special ed, close to 40 job positions in teaching open.
Right, and we already, and anybody that takes a sabbatical, or anybody that needs a leave for restoration of health, or any of those that will come up, as we
Okay.
go.
So,
Okay, Mr. Weiss.
I understand the reason for the degree improvement budget. Can you just clarify for me why there's a difference between the tuition reimbursement and the degree improvement? They almost sound the same.
Yes, they do, Mr. Weitz, and the difference is this. According to the contract, we have promised that teachers who are taking graduate level courses may submit them for approval. Once we approve of their taking a particular course, and we have specific standards for those, they have to be related to what it is that they're teaching in their classrooms. Once we approve those, and then they take the class, if they get a C or better in the course, then we will pay them, according to the contract, a certain percentage of that tuition that they have paid, up to a specific amount each year. Once they get a certain number of credits accrued, however, they can move over laterally on the scale. And that's where the degree improvement is, that's the title degree improvement.
So degree improvement equates to a lateral move.
Yes.
Tuition reimbursement is just that.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions?
That's it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weiss. Ms. Sharp.
Judy, as we move through with personnel, this is such a large area of our budget, and you're asking for some pretty significant staff overall. Along with asking for an explanation of that 4.1 million that is here in increases in salaries, I'd really like to know what it's going to, just exactly what impact and positive effect it does have on our pupil to teacher ratio, classroom sizes, or what have you, because over the last 3 years, well, from the 95-96 year through to now, we've moved up from basically 1,369 personnel members of full-time to now, as you're projecting, 1,409 if we move forward with this. Total employees are gaining significantly. We had 1,327 actually in 95-96. So I'm talking of, a significant gain in personnel for the level of students. And yes, we've had growth, but the ratio of hires for the number of additional pupils have really come down to very, very low ratios as far as adding one teacher or one employee for every 6 students, or one for every 7 as I've tracked them. And we just wonder how we can continue to be adding these levels of new employees year after year for each new group of students. As we looked at these 96, 97, that's something the audience has. I have the 95, 96 personnel numbers. As you look there, and we said that last year's budget was driven by a projected enrollment of 13,128. We had that established. That's what drove last year's budget. We only actually realized, 12,800 and I guess 87, something like that this year instead. So as you looked at these personnel, your personnel figures, and you went to establish what you wanted to hire, did you base it on a 37 student difference that we're increasing over what we projected when we moved forward with a budget last year, or on the 308 students that's our actual difference from what we received this year in student population versus what you expect it to be next year?
I don't think that question has any merit.
I'm trying to understand the rationale for all this.
We're talking about 2 pages here on the budget.
Right. And this personnel sheet was a part of our report, wasn't it?
And the personnel we're talking about is the teachers we just talked about. That should be the subject we're talking about. I don't know where you're off at.
Well, when she did her when she estimated her teaching staff,
she explained where the 13 and a
these
half,
are over and
the
above,
8, and the 11
right,
came from.
over and above last year, correct, Don?
Right.
Okay, if last year's staffing was actually projected on the mid-range projections of a higher enrollment, the difference in our new student body is a lot less than what we would from what we inherited.
If you remember,
And I'm wondering, what do we use?
last year, Dr.
okay.
Sugar had come forward with a request for
Right.
11 teachers.
Right.
We provided 3
Right.
at the elementary level.
Same.
So in order to supplement, you'll recall we had those aides, and right now we have somewhere around 30 aides, I believe, functioning at the elementary level to offset that. When we did the new enrollment projections for you this year, we talked about how to maintain the class size guidelines and use classroom teachers, and that's why there's a difference this year. We did not provide last year the number that was originally requested.
Okay, I realize the 11 teachers that we talked about for elementary, but in the 95-96 year, we had 818 teachers. That's what's on the chart that was updated forwarded to me by Mrs. Miller. We had 818 teachers. We then went to 849.
Well, we had 818 full-time plus the part-time teachers.
Right, 818 to 838, that's 20 teachers. Juan wasn't getting into the special ed classification.
You've got all the special ed teachers included under the teacher category.
On a total.
Right. And we've added there every single year.
Okay, that if you're dealing with totals and you don't want to, I think the full-time is more relevant. It's a little hard to get your prorated full-time equivalent out of your part-time. But we added 19 teachers from the 95 year to the 96. You're now talking about adding another 29 total
Correct.
within this teaching staff.
29 people, 3 of those are part-time. So it's 26 full-time.
Right.
3 part-time.
I think, Mrs.
And I
Clark,
suppose
there's another item, or another issue we have to think about. We went to a reorganized middle school program.
Absolutely.
And you
That's right.
can't go
Sure.
back and look at 95, 96, or 94, 95, and project into 95, 96 because of changing program. A lot of the staffing increase last year came about as a result of a reorganized middle school program, going from a 9th grade center and 2 7-8 centers to 3 7-8-9 centers.
That is correct.
I know some occurred with co-curricular. Essentially, though, we were dealing with the same population, just divided between the 3 buildings, and it had some
But it
effect.
didn't work that easily
Right.
when we
Okay.
started scheduling youngsters, and we added teaming to Penndale, which we did not have when it was a 9th grade center.
Okay, well, then perhaps so that there isn't some question as to what's generating the 29 additional students that are within teachers that are there between elementary and secondary. And we'll have to deal with the rest of the staff as it comes up under its department. Beyond knowing the amount of dollars that are there, it would be nice to be able to say what measurable results will come from this. In other words, will adding 13.5 elementary teachers, will that reduce our average class sizes by 2 students or 5 students? What can we anticipate to come back in the educational value and enhancement of our student body? There should be something related to that we would be able to identify with, because I know we were all expecting the 8 to deal with the modulars. Or in some cases, actually, if we were freeing an art room somewhere, then that really wasn't a new personnel matter. New personnel, they were simply moving to their classroom and giving the art teacher back their art room. So I knew we were looking at 8.
What it does, Vicki, is it maintains the class size guidelines. You recall Dr. Bose said it was not the recommendation of this administration to exceed those class size guidelines. That 13.5 represents holding the class size guidelines at 25 K through 3 and 28 4 through 6.
Okay.
Except for those areas where we didn't have the space and we had to add the 8s.
But formerly your 38s are now going to be reduced to what?
Well, that'll be reduced to 12.
Right.
And the 13.5 teachers.
Judy, am I correct also that the number 29 addition, if that includes nurses, counselors,
That's
psychologists?
Yes.
The teacher,
So
the category teacher includes all of those.
Okay, so it shouldn't be looked at as just teachers.
That's correct.
the teachers and the
Although we call it that.
specialists, but those specialists are all included under the teacher category.
Because of the bargaining unit, can you prepare for us a separate sheet that separates teachers from specialists, even though we
Sure.
realize they're all in the bargaining unit?
Yes.
I think that'll help.
Appreciate seeing that.
You're asking for a breakdown of this 29? Thank you, I was going to ask you that.
So you wanted
I'm awake.
counselors, nurses, you
Well,
want
yeah,
the
you're showing
reading,
20.
the
where
reading
I'm
specialists.
confused is,
But you have people that are we're looking at them like they're in front of classrooms with 28 kids, and they're obviously not. So
Okay.
separating the classroom teachers, those are with kids, specialists.
Where I got confused is when Tommy said we were talking about hiring 40 new teachers, and I'm looking at 29, and I'm trying to figure out where 40 came from.
There are 40 new positions. There
40
will be 40 new, not new positions, 40 positions. There'll be 40 new teachers.
people.
Difference between new versus
New
additional.
employees to the district.
That's right. That's what I was
I
wondering.
know that, I know
There's
that,
40
but you said
additional.
40 new teachers, and that's where I got a little confused. Because the people that are not on ERIP, we're only going to replace them, so that's really not going to add to the
Well,
count.
it's, all right, 38, I'm off by
Well,
2.
no, Tom, I'm not arguing with you, I'm just trying to understand where you come up with that number, that's all. I don't
That's why I
understand.
clearly started off with,
Because
I said
I see
12
20.
ERIP, okay?
Right.
And I started right with the 12.
Yeah.
I just-
But I see 29, that's where I'm a little confused, that's all. Because you said 40 new teachers, and I don't understand where we got 40.
Maybe I can help.
There will be 40 new teachers coming in the district.
But I see 29 here as a collective unit.
29 positions.
All right, let me, just so I understand it, let me walk through it, okay?
Oh, I see.
12
He
teachers,
has it, he has it.
12
Yes, he has it.
teachers to replace TRIP.
Right.
13.5 for elementary,
Right.
8 for the secondary, and 5 special ed.
Correct.
Okay.
Plus any additional people who
Right.
have other
Where we're
reasons to
getting
leave.
confused is you're considering the
I'm
ERI.
including the ERP
Yeah,
replacement.
and I'm concerned on
Right.
replacements and not new. Okay, I'm
There's
sorry.
29
Mrs. Scher
additional-
still has the floor.
Yes. 29 additional and 4 possibly new faces. With the ERI numbers, nothing to do with the level of the staff, but with the numbers, when we look at that figure, is that the net gain, Dennis or
Yes, it is, Mrs.
Judy?
Sharp.
So
That's the
you
net
backed
gain.
out what the incentive was and
That's
the
correct.
dollars
And-
that would be
and those
dedicated
people
to that?
Those people that opted for health insurance, we backed that out also.
Okay. You explained, Judy, your degree improvement figures, but with the tuition reimbursement for elementary and secondary, is this simply that you just also, again, expect unusually high activity with, or an increase in the rates for tuition, that it's jumping from
Actually, both.
135 to 230?
Actually, both, but primarily we based our estimates for next year on the fact that we've had so many young teachers that have come into our district this year and will most likely come into our district next year with the current numbers of people that we're going to need to hire.
Okay, so we can expect that to almost, not quite, but almost double there.
Double?
Yeah, well, we're gonna go from 135 to 230, I gather.
Oh, I see.
Is there other
Yes.
dollars in there?
Yes, that's correct.
Not quite, but, at the same time, aren't our in-services, one of the reasons driving our in-services is for them to obtain credits at a lower, without having
No.
tuition?
No.
And our arrangements recently with the IU and et cetera, no?
No.
You don't expect that to impact it? Okay. Other than that, no, I'm just gonna review all this, and I just ask that if we can get further, more specific information on the breakdown of personnel, I really appreciate that. Thank
We'll be
you.
glad to do that.
Okay, Mr.
And I
Schilling.
appreciate the personnel sheets.
Yeah, I just had a question on page 5, degree improvement, elementary and secondary. Why is it like a 95, 96 or 0 as well as 94, 95? I mean, was that another category or something? I'm sure they were.
For degree improvement?
Yeah, I mean, they improved.
When that happens, Mr. Schilling, when that happens, the individual teachers are paid through the payroll. We put this is almost like a budget transfer. We put this money into the budget, but when the teachers, like if Dennis Kelly taught at Montgomery, when I moved on the scale, that salary is reflected in the Montgomery Elementary School account.
But I mean, this was done before. I mean,
It's done every year.
Just why, it just didn't show up those years? Is that what it's,
No,
a particular item? Or?
It showed up in the budget, but when it's actually expended,
Yes.
it's expended out of the school payroll account where the teacher teaches.
It's added to that account.
It's
There was
added
no
to that, if you know what I mean.
So this is not an increase? is
It's
what I'm
not an
saying.
increase, John.
That's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
You know, I just want to make that clear. No other questions, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's the same
Th-
thing.
Theme readers, how many theme readers do we have?
7, up to 7, depending on the number of times.
6 according to this, if we're paying them $1,000 a piece, we have 6,000 in the budget, so that would be 6.
I was going to say 5 to 7, so I guess right in the middle there.
Okay, one of the things that we're waiting upon is, from Dr. Bose, is a request made to him from myself, and Don Hill was there, and that's that we need to take a very, very close and hard look at secondary. We need to look at every single employee at the high school, and their 6, 7 periods a day. We realize there's a lunch, we realize there's a prep period. There are many, many teachers that are in front of students 3, 4 periods a day, some not at all. They don't have a full caseload of students that we would anticipate that they should have. The reason I know this is not because of anything that has been shared with me by the administration, but that whenever many times over 5 years, whenever a teacher is given a special assignment or what appears to be a cushy arrangement, you get other teachers that'll call and say something. Will call you privately or personally to share that with you because it angers other teachers, different arrangements. So Dr. Bose was requested in one of our personal meetings, agenda meetings. I'm sorry, you know?
Go right ahead.
You're aware of what I'm talking about then?
Yes.
Okay. And that really has to be looked at. That, you know, there's always talk about the 6-period assignments, how many of them have that, and also the department heads, and some of those other special areas and assignments that have been given over the years. And it's hard to believe that we need 6 theme readers, or 7 theme readers, even though it's $6,000 on a budget this size, when you've got people up there lacking full assignments, truly full assignments.
Mrs. Mangle, I know that Dr. Bose is looking at that very carefully.
Okay, so that's information that's yet to come, and I believe,
Correct.
if it's going to show the way I believe it's going to show, based on information I've been collecting a long time from people that'll call me, there's going to be reductions. There has to be. I don't see how there can't be. I don't believe for 1 minute there's going to be 8 people hired at the high school. I could be wrong, we'll wait and see, so we'll wait for the results of that.
No, and we weren't asking for 8 at the high school, though. We were
I'm sorry.
asking for 2.5 at the high school.
Well, where do I have 8 from? What did I
8
just
was
pick?
the total secondary.
Middle.
Total secondary, that includes middle.
5.2 in the middle.
Okay. All right, I'm talking now specifically the high school, they're 2.5.
That was 2.5.
I didn't take that up. Okay, all right. The other question, Social Security, not Social Security, the benefits. How many people, Mr. Kelly, are opt out and take the cash payment for not taking our insurance and going with their
I
spouses?
wouldn't want to give you a definite answer. I will get that for you for the next meeting. Mrs. Mingle, I'm not.
Can you tell me a thereabouts?
I think it's about 100 and I think about 125
Opt out?
opt out,
And we pay them on
and we
that
pay them
cash.
$107 a month in cash.
Now, that is,
That's part of
that
it.
is
That
something
goes-
we provided only to the bargaining unit, is that correct?
That's correct.
Have we ever researched the possibility of doing that across the board, all employees, full-time? Maybe not to the tune that we pay the teachers because it was reflective of salaries, but a dollar figure to opt out of our
I can look into that with
coverage
Diane.
to go with their spouses.
I will look into that for you.
All right. Do administrators, I'm sorry, there's something I just missed. Do administrators have that also?
Yes.
The option to opt out?
That's correct.
So they receive what the bargaining unit received also? So now it's everybody else, bus drivers, blah, 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 blah. Okay. All right. Okay. Community, questions? Anybody? Mr. Fitzgerald. Mr. Kelly, you make a note of that request?
I did.
Thank you.
Vince Rapinski, Tomlinson Township. Dr. Miller, is the Saturday ISS program the summer library program?
No, the Saturday ISS program is a program that began 3 or 4 years ago that is a program for all secondary students who are assigned to ISS during the week, and instead they go on Saturdays, and this program pays for the teachers who monitor the program. At the time that we began the program a number of years ago as a pilot program, we agreed with the board that we would have 1 teacher per every 15 students on a Saturday. And I don't know whether to say that we're happy to tell you that the program has grown, but we know that parents have been very happy with the program because the students, instead of missing classwork, are able to serve their time owed on a Saturday. And so that money goes for that.
Okay. It says, there's a line item here, teacher induction program.
Yes.
What is that? Is that a recruitment program for teachers?
The state, and then I'm going to let Dr. Mangano talk a little bit about that. The state requires all school districts in Pennsylvania to have an induction program for new teachers. And part of that program is to have mentor teachers work with new teachers and also to have a certain degree of staff development for those new teachers so that they are able to perform effectively in the classroom in the first few years that they are there.
And moving them toward their certification, toward their permanent certification.
Okay. There's one other line item here. It says 11098 department head. Is that something different than just the regular salaries for the department heads?
11-0, let me just...
70,150. Page 5.
Oh, there it is. These are department heads in the regular ed areas, science, English, social studies. They are stipends that teachers get by contract, those that are the department heads, over and above their regular salaries. And this includes quite a number of people across the system.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shapinsky. It should be noted that ISS is an acronym for in-school suspension.
Yes.
Dr. Miller,
That's why I asked.
that program was capped, I believe, when it first started at 15,000. You're proposing what, 18.5?
I think when we first started, it was at 10, and then we moved to 12. The reason for that was the cost per hour per teacher. Also, it increased the number of teachers that we were using because the program became very popular.
The staff-student ratio?
It's one staff member to every 15 students.
I know, but this 18,500 figure, how many teachers does that represent?
I don't know, Mr. Mosey. Maybe Dr. Hassler might be able to know that because this year it's a different number from last year. We can certainly check on
I
that.
don't have the exact numbers, but in relation to the ratio, I think we've exceeded that now. We're around 1 to 20, 1 to 22, depending on the week.
Is that including the administrator that also gives time and collects pay
Yes.
into the ratio?
No, the administrator is not part of that ratio, not to my knowledge, unless it has changed this year.
Well, when this first came up, it was very controversial that we weren't actually punishing the taxpayers for the discipline of the students as far as passing on the additional costs or allowing it to get out of hand as far as the level of dollars being dedicated to salaries for the detention over and above the program that's still offered in school. It was an option for the students. Is it still an option for the students as to whether they serve their suspension in school?
Yes, it's an option for their parents and for them to choose.
Then has this increased because of adding extra sites?
The first year that we had the program, Mrs. Scher, it was a pilot program in one school. The program was successful, and it was then extended to all the secondary schools the next year, which made the cost go up. And the second year of the program, it was successful, but it got more and more successful as the year went by, and we anticipated in the coming years we would need even more money because we had more students taking advantage of the program. More parents were finding out about it, more administrators were finding that it was working for them, and they were recommending to parents these options. And so the more students that we had, the more teachers we needed.
Okay, well, I remember the very beginning, and quite frankly, even as a pilot, it was being proposed for each school, but no one quite accepted the fact that for discipline suspension time, that we necessarily had to have a child in a familiar building, as familiar as their very own home site for the middle schools.
Correct.
And it was really argued for it to be combined into one to make it more cost efficient.
And it is. It is still in one site, but when you have a lot of students that are coming to the program, you have a lot of rooms that you're using.
Okay.
Okay?
Then it hasn't moved from Pembroke?
To my knowledge, it hasn't moved.
To spread to one at each school?
It's still
I'm sorry, I thought that's what you were saying.
I'm
that it
sorry
had
if you misunderstood.
spread.
Judy, do we have any idea if this program has any effect on the amount of kids getting ISS?
You said it's growing.
I'm not sure. I can check. I don't know about this year, Mr. Allen. We can certainly check on that.
Actual numbers?
As a percentage of kids, realizing
It has grown every year.
I'm wondering if it's been a deterrent.
What I can tell you is that it reduced the number of in-school days, which freed up more teachers to be available for students instead of being in the ISS room on a daily basis as they had been assigned previously. And it also allowed students to be in class more than they were before when they were out for 3 full days.
That's what I always liked about it. We're not taking them away from the class, but I'm
That's
just
correct.
curious if it's had an effect on the whole ISS percentage of.
I don't have exact numbers, but in talking to the administrators, they felt in general, and I can get these numbers, that it is a deterrent overall to the discipline that takes place. The numbers are growing in the ISS program, but overall, they feel that it's a deterrent as far as discipline.
Well, it's a greater punishment.
You have to understand.
It's a greater
since
punishment.
Well, since we've added 2 security people at Brook and Field, the numbers are increasing.
We're catching more.
And we're finding more problems.
Well, let's get rid of the
I don't know if I want to talk.
Well, there's the problem. They're driving the budget up.
Mr. Wood is correct, though.
But more parents are selecting Saturday because it's a greater punishment. I know that intimately, Mr. Allen, because Saturday, these kids have lives. They've got baseball practice, soccer, some of them have weekend jobs, sleeping in. And for their parents to select a Saturday is a greater punishment than leaving well enough alone.
That is absolutely true, and I can tell you as a former principal, when we would call parents and explain that their son or daughter had been involved in an in-school suspendable offense. The first thing they would say is, well, what does that mean? And we would explain, well, your child will be out of direct instruction for 3 days and in a room supervised by a teacher where assignments will be sent to him or her. And the first thing they always said, almost without exception, well, I don't want my child to miss school. What good is it going to do my child to miss all these days of instruction? So that's been a positive thing for us as well.
May have been a deterrent for teachers to discipline also, I think, because students were missing their curriculum.
Okay, any further questions? Mr. Shapinsky, are you happy? You started this.
I find out it was going to spark that kind of conversation.
You never would have done that. Is there anybody else? Don't let Mr. Shapinsky's questions scare you. Come on down. Anybody else? Seriously? Okay, now, board members, this is at your pleasure here. It is 10 o'clock. There is 1 half hour. Should we try one more category, or do we close it down?
What is it? Special ed.
Employee benefits.
That'll be about 2 minutes. That's easy. I can do it really fast. I don't want to be redundant. They went up 6.6%.
Mr. Kelly.
They went up 6.6% in total.
Mr. Kelly, I'm not worried about you. I'm worried about the half-hour board dialogue, okay? I'm not worried about you.
Okay.
Okay. You want to give it a try, Mosey?
Yeah. No question. Yeah.
Yeah, do that.
Okay,
He
let's
said 2 minutes. He has 2 minutes.
He's already done
That's
it.
right.
It's over, 6.6%.
We're the problem.
6.6%.
Go ahead.
They're interspersed throughout the budget. As you can see on page 6, if you look where the medical benefits are, starting with medical insurance, and then look where the asterisks are. They're also on page 138. On page 138 are those benefits that cannot be tracked to one budget. They are expended and distributed as they are used. When you look at unemployment, workman's comp, salary continuation insurance, we only expend that when it's used, and that will be charged to the budget that it applies to. That's why they're in what they call a suspense account. That's basically it. We're waiting to hear back from Blue Cross if they're going to reduce the rates under 12%, and I'm also waiting to hear on a dental and vision, an additional dental and vision plan to see if we can't save some money there in those areas.
And you're also going to check on a cash payout to
On
other
the cash
employees
payouts,
other
that's
than the
separate,
bargaining
that's for you
unit.
this tonight.
Okay, board questions to the right, Mr. Schill.
No questions.
Thank you. Mr. Sherrill.
No, we addressed that earlier, thank you.
I didn't hear you.
No, I'm sorry, I addressed mine earlier when I
Okay,
asked.
Mr. White.
I think it's something controversial.
I don't know, take tips from Mr. Shapinsky.
No questions. No questions.
No questions? Mr. Hill. Mr. Allen.
No question.
Mr. Mosey.
Told you.
There you go, okay. Members of the audience, look at them lining up.
Eddie, you dare get up.
Anybody else? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to hold then at employee benefits. We're looking at the next budget meeting for Thursday, April 10th at 7:30. We'll pick up, finance will pick up a tuition in-state. Mrs.
2 seconds.
You want 2 more seconds?
I really could do that in 2 seconds. It really is an informational
Can you tell
item.
what friends?
Too much stuff. Is that okay? Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to explain to you what this item is. It's on page 8 of your budget book. It falls under regular education. The ASN number is 11520. You see a line item for $270,375, and what that represents are students that we have that are remanded to penal institutions across the state, George Junior Republic, Camp Hill School, and also some of our alternative ed students that are placed there by the courts. We received back from the state $210,000 to offset that cost, but it doesn't cover the entire amount. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention because you're going to see in the budget in both the regular ed category and special ed category tuition in state. And I'm sure some people have questions why we're paying tuition in the state when we're in the school district.
Do you have a separate sheet on that?
No, there's no sheet on that. That was just
Okay,
informational.
can you please make one?
Do you want to know the number of students?
Number of
that have-
students and where they're at?
I'll
And
have
what
to
we get
get-
from the state and what the balance is.
Right, I'll have to give it to you in terms of the average daily membership, because
Sure.
again, with these students, you could have them placed there for 45 days, for 40 days. So you may have 50 kids, but it's not 50 full-time kids.
Well, it's at the court's pleasure.
Right,
The
it's at the
assignment.
course pleasure. I can give you what we have to date, what it's looked like.
Yeah, can you do
Judy,
that?
what you're saying then is that the total cost of this thing is more than the 270,000. We do get some sort of benefit, reimbursement.
Well, 270,000 is what we budget. We get 210,000 back. So.
Out of the 270?
Yeah.
So it only nets out to about $6.
And then I'll include the special ed though.
Well, no, the special ed piece gets included under the allocation for special ed. They come in two different ways. This is just the regular ed allotment.
Okay.
So we have kids at Camp Hill.
Oh, yeah.
Are they of quitting age?
What?
Are they of quitting age?
No, sorry to say they're not.
So they're very young.
And we also have two right now placed at George Junior, which is out towards the western part of the state, and both of those youngsters are not within an age where they would be opting out of school.
Or take a GED.
Right.
Okay, board questions to the left.
Just to back up on what I said, you're budgeting 270,000,
Yes,
but we get approximately 210 back.
right, right.
State incomes.
We never know what
So
that's,
it's a 60 grand expense.
right, that's what it really is.
Why are we showing?
Because
I think this is misleading them.
Well, because we are never really sure how much we're going to get from the state. I have to go as if we're getting no subsidy. So I budget and estimate as close as I can, given a historical trend for placements. But that subsidy,
Well, how can we track that in the budget then?
In revenues.
It's a revenue item.
it's revenue.
We would have to account for it, even if she knew
Yeah.
exactly, we would have to account with
My
revenue.
questions, thank you.
Mr. Allen.
No questions.
Mr. Hill. Mr. White.
Now, if we would have had an in-service program before these kids might, no,
I don't even say it.
I didn't mean in-service. I mean, I meant an ISS program.
ISS.
Sorry.
Do you think that
And
would save
and it was still a bad joke.
Don and I didn't take PRT.
No questions directly to Judy, but since we're going to close out, and I know how quickly an adjournment can come, I'd just like to wish Dennis well, and offer my congratulations and best wishes as he moves forward. And to wrap up, since Dennis wouldn't be here, I've asked that in future meetings,
I'll be here till the 18th.
He'll be here the.
but you
But
were
thank you.
unsure if you were back for another budget session or not. I realize. And I would like to ask if we could please, when we have handouts to be received that are relevant to the next future budget meeting, we could have them in advance in our courier packets rather than sitting
I have
through.
already discussed that with Dr. Hessler.
It's a great goal, but we were changing those at 3 o'clock this afternoon.
That's what happens when you include
Well-
150 people in the process.
When you what?
When you include 150 people in the process, pulling
That's
those
what can
numbers together,
happen?
that can happen.
Well, we have our designated areas to be discussed, and, if we have these handouts, it'd probably be a little bit easier for us to be efficient if we don't have to read them as we sit.
Okay, so according to my notes, then we are back on the 10th, and we start with general supplies and books. Dr. Hassler, you're on deck.
We'll actually start that on Tuesday, with the language arts adoption
Committee
recommendation.
meeting,
That's
the
fine.
8th.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
So moved.